I get a lot of comments about Manor Lords being too hard and people giving up on the game. In this video, I'm putting my nearly 350 hours of experience to work for you, giving the best tips and advice to figure out how to stop sucking at Manor Lords and actually having fun. As always, there are timestamps to each important topic, so skip around to the parts that you need most. For tip number 1, let's look at how market stalls work. For every Burgage plot that you have in a region, you get an increased capacity of each market stall of 1. So in this case, you can see we have 100% coverage. We have 25 items, which means we have 25 Burgage plots. And if you go out and count, we have exactly 25. Now you'll notice we do have some that have multiple families. This is a 4-family residence. Doesn't matter. These 4 families will only increase the stall by 1, even though we have, if you look up here, 42 families in total. So 25 supply in the stalls to cover 42 families worth of consumption. Now for clothing, that's not a problem. For fuel, that's not a problem. Fuel is consumed once per month per Burgage plot, and then during the winter time, it's consumed twice per month per Burgage plot. Clothing is reserved once per Burgage plot, right when the building is first made, and then it's not ever consumed. So let's take this town for example. We have 25 leather and 25 shoes. If we never build another Burgage plot, we could literally walk away from this game for 24 hours and come back. They will still have these exact same 25 leather and 25 shoes. They do not actually get used, and they just sit in the market stalls. Now, food, on the other hand, is actually consumed. So generally, you're not going to have your issues with fuel as much. Clothing, really very rarely. Most of the issues are coming from food and food variety. Let's spend most of our time talking about that. Now again, we have 25 capacity for each item, and you can see here we have 5 different food types. Even though we don't have up to 25 of any one type of food, we have 5 different types, which is enough to cover everything at 100%. And let's look at each individual stall. We have 3 different stalls here. You can see 2 of these stalls are pretty much full. One of them still has room, so I suspect whoever's running this last stall will probably restock and get these numbers up to 25 each. But if you add everything together, you can only go up to the maximum, which is again 25. So you see there's 17 bread here, 6 bread here, and then this guy will probably bring in the rest of the bread, another 2 bread to reach 25. Same thing with the berries, etc. So when it comes to where your stalls are placed or where your markets are placed, your stalls will actually send the goods to everywhere on the map in that same region. It doesn't matter where the house is. You could have your house at the opposite end of a region, and as long as that stall has enough supply, it will send those goods to that house instantaneously. They don't actually travel. Goods don't actually exchange. It basically just teleports to the house and is consumed instantly at a monthly tick rate. So when you're setting your market and your stalls, the most important thing is to make sure that your stalls are located wherever the goods are coming from. My personal preference is to put them close to your storehouses, your granary and your storehouse. Now you can see here for this town, I have 3 food stalls and 3 food workers in the granary. I have 2 non-food stalls, so one for the firewood and one for the clothing, and I have 2 people in the storehouse that are working these stalls. Again, they have access to the goods that get replenished within these stalls. So the firewood is already stacked, 516 firewood here, so that's perfect. He has access to it. Clothing-wise, he has 104 leather and 257 shoes. He will never need to replenish this out. And again, shoes and clothing don't get used anyways, but if we were to build more Burgage plots and they had room, he would have access to it anyways. So that's why you want to have whoever's running the stall to be very close to wherever the goods they need to stock from. So in my case, across the street from the granary or the storehouse. Now that doesn't mean you can't put storehouses in other locations. I actually used to say that you should only put them near granaries and storehouses, but I've changed my mind on that, and you can put them wherever the goods are going to be placed. My personal preference is to put them in these because these guys have nothing else to do anyways. All they do is they run around with a cart, pick things up 10 at a time, and bring them back. They don't actually do any production. So having one person running the stall all the time means that there's really not much labor lost anyways, because only 2 people can run the carts at a time, and the 3rd person will just grab stuff by hand. Each family has 3 people, right? So 2 people would run the carts. 1 person would do it by hand. So if you have your stall here at the granary, that means we would go from being able to carry 21 items at a time down to 20 items at a time. It's a very, very small loss of efficiency. Now let's take, for example, what about this woodcutter? Let's say each person cuts down 5 trees per month. And if you have 1 person running the stall, now you went from cutting down 15 trees per month to only cutting down 10 per month. So it's a very big difference to have your production workers running stalls. I generally don't recommend it, but you can still do it and it can still be very efficient. You're going to want to put only 1 stall, and you're going to want to make sure this person is the one that opens that stall. So the way you can do that is, you can see right here, it snaps to these different locations, and it's kind of hard to get one stall. But if you make this point, this third point, you kind of make more of like a triangle shape, you can get a single stall there. So you can see right here, there's one stall. If we wanted to get two stalls, you can make it a little bit longer and get two stalls. But let's see if this guy actually wants to open a stall. When you put down a stall like this, you're not going to really know who's going to be putting it down and if it's the right person. But the best way to deal with that is to let the stall get built, figure out who is building it. So this is the tanner. So the tanner is the one that wants to build the stall. So what we could do if we really wanted the tanner to have his own stall, we could easily delete this. We can go build it right across the street from him. So here's our tanner. And again, we build just enough to get one stall. He should be plopping it down. No, it's a firewood stall. So let's let this one get built and see who's doing that one. Sometimes you have to spend a little time playing whack-a-mole here, but I'll show you how to deal with this. So firewood stall, this is coming from the trader, oddly enough. So the trader does have access to items, and sometimes the trader can be a decent option, although I generally don't like to do it because we would rather have him carrying items back to the trading post so he can sell stuff. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete this stall, and let's see who builds the next one. So now we see a food stall. So now who's building the food stall? We don't have anybody else here. It's probably one of our berry pickers. And it's actually the hunter, which is somebody up here, this person. So if we were in short of food as well, we could technically do another stall for this person. And then what we would do is we would delete this stall. And then the idea is that they would rebuild it right here. So now you can see this person really wanted to build a stall. We let them do it. But we had to give them the room to do it first. And then over here, this person wanted to build a clothing stall. Now they get access to their own. Beautiful. And you'd always want to just double check, because just because the tanner is the one that wanted it before doesn't mean that that's the case now. You can see now it's the trader actually that has the stall. So what we can do in this case, let's say we really wanted the tanner to have it and not the trader. We're going to go ahead and empty out this building, get rid of all the workers of the tannery. Now we're going to go into the clothing stall and go to the people tab, and we're going to reassign this person to work here. So now the trader does not have access to this stall, it's the tanner. And then we can put that worker back on the trading post. So now they have that. Now let's see who has access to this food stall. It is the trader. We obviously don't want that because remember the hunting camp was the one that wanted to open it. We don't want our trader to have it, so we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go back up here to our trading. Actually, the easiest way is to click on your stall, people, click this reassign. We're going to reassign them to the hunting camp. Now, for some reason, the trader didn't want to come, so what we need to do is we need to take it up to the next step, which sometimes this happens. Clear out the trading post entirely. Don't even let them have the option to do it. So you take it down to the last person. Then we come back to our trading stall. Make sure there's room in the hunting camp that was trying to build it before. We can go to people, reassign, put them in the hunting camp. And that's pretty much how you control the market stalls. You can see right here what I did is I added these 3 at a time. In the initial phase, I actually had 1, and then I expanded to build 2. And then eventually I deleted this whole thing and I did all 3 at once, and I did the exact same thing. I found out who wanted to take these stalls over. I cleared out their workplace until they were the only ones left. I went ahead and reassigned them to the granary, and I ensured that all 3 of these guys are running the stalls that they want. Now, let's assume that you have enough stock. We have a lot of food. You can see here we have tons of food, so we should never have any shortage of food. We should always be able to reach 100%. The other thing you need to look is make sure that your stall has room to keep going if you don't have 100%. Again, we need 25 of each item. We have 5 items. So that means we need to have 125 inventory space. Each stall can hold 50 each. So we have 150 capacity. We only need 125. So we're good. Assuming we don't add more burgage plots, this setup will work infinitely. Again, make sure you have the inventory, make sure you have the stall space, and make sure you have a good set up to where people are close to the goods that they need. Now, let's assume you did everything right and you're still having issues. I specifically kept this save file because this is something that happens and it drives people absolutely bonkers. Now, if you look at how many burgage plots we have 32 in total. You can see we're short here on a couple clothing items, but it's not because we don't have enough. It's because we don't have the right type of item. But we have 32 burgage plots. That's 100% coverage. If you have firewood and charcoal, you can actually double the coverage, so you should never run out of fuel if you have firewood and charcoal. But if we look here on the food item, we actually have enough food to supply all these houses. So 32, we have 32 berries, 32 eggs, and 30 veggies. So every house here should have 2, and some of the houses should be short 1 item. Only 2 houses won't get veggies. Everybody else should have enough. But you can see these houses are red, and this save has actually been going for about a month. It did not update. So sometimes you'll have this issue where no, even if everything is perfect, you will still have to figure out, oh, fix. So the best way to do this is wait until it's not raining. Right now it's raining. It's not a good time to do it because we're going to have to delete these stalls. If it's raining, it's going to damage all the goods that will be placed on the floor as soon as we delete the market stall. So just wait for a little bit, be patient. And you can see it's still not really updating. I think one house got a little bit of supply, but really these houses, there's zero reason why these should not have the supply that they need. Okay, now it's stopped raining. This is perfect. So we're going to pause the game. We're going to go into our granary and make sure we have a lot of people. If we have any spare people, put them on. So we want all 6 people. We want to go to the advanced tab and we want to limit the work area and shrink it down. You only want your people worrying about this area. Give it a second for people to come back. They'll come back to the granary and then we're going to delete all of these. So go ahead and delete them. Now again, if it's raining, do not do this. If it looks like it's about to rain, wait for a day or two and see if it rains. All these items will be damaged very quickly if it rains. So now that we limited the space that people are going to pick items up, they're going to be really focusing on this. If you do not do this, if you do not limit the work area, they will continue to go to other houses. They'll go to things all over the map and then they will ignore a lot of the stuff. And knowing the AI, they love to rain on your supplies when they're sitting on the floor. So make sure you do that. Once all the supplies are back in the granary, then we'll go ahead and rebuild the marketplace. There we go. So everything's gone. We're going to go back to our marketplace. We don't need to build a bigger marketplace. We just need those 3. So we're going to redo the exact same 3. And you'll notice we got 3 stalls. You have to babysit it though. Make sure that you're getting food stalls. See right here, we got a firewood stall. Delete it. Immediately delete it. We don't need a firewood stall. Our firewood and our clothing are perfect. We have 100% coverage. We only want food. So babysit these things. There's another firewood. Now, if it starts doing that too much, then it can be a problem. Let's let these things get built and see if a third one gets built here. What is this other one? See, there we got 1 food stall, 1 firewood stall. So we can delete the firewood stall and let's see if somebody builds another. Yeah, see, it's still building the firewood stall. So what we're going to do is if it really is insistent on building a firewood stall, we're going to go ahead and take, they're coming from the large storehouse. So take everybody out, delete this thing and see what pops up. And just like that, we got ourselves another food stall. So now we have 3 food stalls. They'll be able to resupply all those. And we need to make sure, does somebody take these stalls over? Hopefully not. No, nobody took these stalls over. So as soon as we pop these guys back in, they take those stalls control, which is perfect. We got all of our stalls right next to our storehouses. We've got enough coverage here. We'll wait for maybe half a month and we should have full coverage on all these houses in the back, even though we literally changed nothing. There we go. So you can see it's been not even half a month. We have the exact same 3 stalls. Our capacity hasn't changed. Our inventory hasn't changed. And the people running the stalls have not changed. Actually, I take that back. There's some people running these stalls. I don't know who they are. We have a miner running the stall. Beautiful. So what we're going to do is to fix that, same thing we're going to do before. We're going to get rid of everybody in the granary until we have only the stall workers. We go into this tab. The miner is now going to be a granary worker. And then this food stall is being run by a blacksmith. That's not going to work. So we're going to put him over here in the granary. And then we would want to go back to whatever they came from. So one of our blacksmiths, so we'll put them back on and then wherever the other one was. But anyways, if we look back here, we have perfect supply. We didn't change anything. So just be aware, sometimes your stalls will be bugged. And generally the reason they get bugged is because you build them early in the game and then later you add a ton of burgage plots. So I've noticed there's something between having stalls that are supplying goods and burgage plots that are built way after the fact. For some reason, they don't recognize them and they don't actually send them goods from certain stalls. There's something that has to do with that. So by deleting it and then rebuilding it, it actually fixes and clears that bug. And then the final tip I want to talk about regarding marketplaces. If you have a really big town, and in this case, I actually don't have my save file anymore because I updated to the recent experimental patch, but I could explain essentially how you want to set these up. So you want to generally have zones that specialize in certain types of products. So for example, in this case, I have a granary full of ale. This granary only handles ale, and I have it right next to the tavern because that's where it goes. If you were to, let's say, for example, build 10 burgage plots that are all producing vegetables because you need to feed 1,000 people, then what you're going to want to do is you're going to have all your vegetable gardens in one area. You're going to build a granary house specifically for that and keep it in the area so you can get to those goods quickly. You're going to want to go to the advanced tab and limit it. You can see I did the same thing for ale, but in this case, if we wanted to do it for veggies, we would limit everything and only allow vegetables. And then make sure you staff it with as many people as you need to run stalls. And then same thing as the previous tip that we just did. You make sure that stall is as close to that granary as possible and as many workers there as you have. And then you go through the same process of making sure that nobody else puts the stall there. Move people around, delete stalls, whatever you have to do, but make sure that that granary worker that is collecting only veggies has a veggie stall, and that's all they do is stock vegetables. You do the same thing for farmhouses. So you have a bunch of farms that produce wheat into bread. Same thing, you put a granary over here, specialize it for bread, and then have a marketplace right next to it. Apple orchards are the same thing. Beehives are the same thing. Berries are the same thing. You can have your little berry farm up here and then just have a granary right next to it. And then your stall is right across the street. So the market stall does not have to be in the central part of your town next to your main granary and your main storehouse. And in general, in the late game, if you have a massive town, I do not recommend this setup. You need to eventually transition out of this. But if you're keeping your town to maybe 150, maybe 200 people, this is probably the best setup that you can do, because it's too complicated. If you do it the other way, you kind of lose a lot of efficiency. But once you start to get into that 500 to 1,000 range, you really do need to specialize where the stalls are. Like I said, just have one granary for one good type, one storehouse for one good type. Same thing with a storehouse. You can have an area for just clothing, you have an area for just firewood, and you have dedicated people only stocking that good. For the next section, we'll talk about food-related tips. There are 6 different food types. However, if we open up any individual Burgage plot, it'll tell you how many food types they need. They do not care what type of food they have as long as they have 3 different food types. So certain foods are much cheaper than others to purchase. However, when it comes to the population actually eating it, it does not matter. So that means certain food types should be prioritized over others because they're cheap to produce, they don't require perks to get, or you can mass produce an item with much less labor. So let's go over each food item. Meat is very important in the early game because oftentimes that's the only one you can get right off the bat. However, it's very hard to get a substantial amount of meat to feed a big town unless you have a rich deposit of wild animals, and in this case we don't. But if you do have a rich deposit, example of this region, you do have a few more animals, but the animal count isn't really the main reason. Most of your increase is going to come from taking these 2 perks, the trapping perk and the advanced skinning. The trapping perk basically allows each hunter to lay a trap somewhere randomly in the forest, and then from time to time, you will get passive meat from that. And then the second perk, it doubles the amount of meat harvested by hunters, meaning when they would normally grab 2 meat from one deer, they will now get 4 meat from that same deer. So with these 2 perks and this Polycion, which increases the wild animal regeneration rate by twice as much, but it reduces the yield from your crops. So you never want to do this on a region where you're doing farming, but if you're not doing farming, this can actually increase the amount that you hunt significantly. So when you pair this together with the trapping and the advanced skinning, it's a massive difference, and you can actually get a decent amount. However, it is very expensive because, again, you have to give up farming to do this, and you have to spend 2 perk points to get 1 food type. It's very expensive to do. Also, if you are going to go the trapping route, I recommend making multiple hunting camps because each one is going to place down. You're going to want to have multiples of them around so you can get a decent passive yield. I was kind of trolling there. 5 or 6 is too many. Generally 2 is more than enough. Maybe 3 at most if you can't keep the population down. The other thing before we move on from meat, always set yourself a nice limit. I usually try not to go below 5 or 6 because you could run the risk of hunting the whole herd. And if you do, they will actually disappear from the map forever and you cannot get them back. So put it at maybe 5. Sometimes they go below this. So you do have to be careful. You don't want to set it to 1 because they could accidentally overhunt and then cause the herd to go extinct. So if you have 3 or 4 camps, you probably want to stay around maybe somewhere between 6 and 10. And you should never have an issue with overhunting them. Now, I tested meat production in several scenarios. I did one with a regular hunt. I did one with rich animals, but no perks and no policy. I turned on the policy and retested it. And then I took the perks and tested it again. So I have 4 scenarios. I'll put the data up on the screen, but you can see when you have the perks and the policy all activated together, you can create a significant amount of meat in the several hundred per year. It also produces a lot of hides as well, so you could use that for something else. But as far as food goes, I would say meat is generally not something I would recommend relying on unless you have a region that has rich source of wild animals and you don't need to do any farming and you don't need to spend those perk points elsewhere. I generally don't recommend using these for a big town because you probably need the perk points for other things. Now the next food type is berries. The thing that's special about berries is a rich deposit and a regular deposit will both give you a tremendous amount of food if you manage them correctly. You can see in this case, this berry deposit is just a regular one. However, I've constructed 6 forager huts and I have a lot of people here ready to go to harvest. In the middle of March, you will see the first tick of berries start to come up. You'll see a little green arrow and it'll say growth. Each time you get a growth tick on a regular berry deposit, it gives you 40 berries that you can harvest. You're going to get several ticks per month, and you'll have at least 3 months to harvest. I believe it's actually a little bit more than that, but you can easily get 300 to 400 berries per year with a couple workers and several forager huts. So berries can be a very reliable source of early food and late game food. However, sometimes you get stuck in a situation where your berries are nowhere near where your granary is, and so there is a way around that though. And this setup is actually perfect for that. You probably are going to want to build even more forager huts than this, because if you look at each individual forager hut, they have room for 50 capacity, 50 berries each. So if you have 6 berry huts, that means you have 300 total storage capacity for that one season. And then eventually, wherever your granary is, they will send workers out to come grab that supply and bring it back. However, you're not going to be able to keep up with how quickly you are pulling the berries. So you need to make sure you have enough of these forager huts so you can have your temporary storage. The alternative is you could put a granary up here just to handle that if you want. Sometimes it's a little more complicated. If you're not going to make a huge town, I recommend not doing that and just letting the granary grab it over time. Because you got to remember, once the berries are all picked for the season, they will sit at 0. These guys will have nothing to do. Your granary workers will have plenty of time during winter and summer to go grab everything from the storage and bring it back. So it's not really a rush to do it usually. And the further away it is, the more forager huts you're going to want to have. I've even gone upwards of 8 to 10, just so I can move people around as berry huts get full. You can pull them off, put them on one behind. And when that one gets full, you put another one on behind and another one. And as they fill up, you just keep moving to the empty ones, and then you should be good to go. And like I said, if you're not too far, you will get some help from the granary. They'll pull 10 at a time with their carts, but I wouldn't rely on it. Generally, you're going to want to have enough berry huts so that you can store it yourself in the pantry and then slowly sift it back into the large granary. And then during the non-picking times, you just pull everybody and they can go do something else useful, like work on wood, go plant farms, etc. Now, the other thing about berries is sometimes you will get a region that has a rich berry source. As you can see right here, it doubles the amount of berries. It goes from 64 to 128. It also increases the tick rate that they respawn at. Next, let's talk about berries. Berries are a special resource that are viable to use as a permanent food source from the early game all the way up into the late game, no matter how big your town is. And the reason berries are so good, even if you don't have a rich deposit, you can produce anywhere from 300 to 400 berries per year if you hit the berries at the right time. So you'll notice in spring, right at the beginning of March, usually you have to wait until halfway through March to get the first tick of berries. When you hover your mouse over this, you'll see the green arrow appear and it'll say growing. And then you'll see 40 berries pop up. That's when you need to have multiple people picking as many berries as quickly as they can. Because what you want to do is you want to get that berry deposit from 40 down to 0. And then the next tick happens, you get another 40 and you take it down to 0. Another tick happens, you take it down to 0. So instead of harvesting it all at once and only getting 64, you can actually get anywhere from 300 to 400 for a berry deposit because you're picking them so that they never reach the max capacity. Now again, to do that, you're going to need multiple forager huts with multiple people in it. Generally, you can probably get away with 2 forager huts and 2 workers. However, if you want to really go hard, I would recommend going even more. You can go 4 to 6 forager huts with 1 person in each. And the nice thing about this setup is it'll work no matter how far the berries are from your main town. Let's say, for example, if our granary was here and the berries were up here by the wild animals. If we had this exact same setup, we could, right in March, when the berries start to show up, you just throw 1 person in each. They will make their way up to the berries and start picking. And they have plenty of storage here. You can see each forager hut has 50 storage. And if we have 6 of them, that means we have room for 300 berries without a single one leaving and going back to the granary. Now, obviously, your granary will help you a little bit. They will send carts out throughout the month to go pick them up and bring them back. However, there's no way, absolutely no way that they can keep up with how quickly you're going to be picking berries. Because again, you're going to be getting 300 to 400 in the course of maybe 3 months, 3.5 months, something like that. It's a very short period of time. So they can't keep up with the supply. However, once you're done and the berries are at 0 and they've gone out a season, all you do is pull your workers, go put them on something else, and then your granary worker will eventually slowly work their way up to these forager huts, pull them, and then bring them back to the granary. And by the time you're ready, usually in December is when everything will be cleared out, and then you're ready for spring the next year. Again, the beautiful thing about berry deposits is even the regular one without the rich deposit can produce produce a massive amount of food. If you are on one that has a rich deposit, it will give you a little bit more berries, and the amount that ticks up each time is greater. I believe it goes from 40 to 80. So you can essentially double the amount of berries that you get. So if 300 or 400 isn't enough, you could potentially get 600 to 800. And you could even go a little further if you take this perk right here, Force Management, to get double the capacity of berry deposits. My personal opinion is this perk is never worth it. Not for regular deposits and not for rich deposits. You will have so many berries, even on a regular deposit, that it's just such a wasted perk. You can spend it better elsewhere. So again, just to recap this, because this is very important. Hit the berries in their growth phase when you see that green up arrow. Get as many people on it as possible. Have multiple forager huts. The most efficient way is one person per forager hut and have multiple of them. At least 2. I recommend more than that, maybe 4 to 6. And if you really want to go crazy, you can get upwards of 8. And if you're swimming in berries and you want to get rid of them, they sell for 3 gold each, which is a tremendous amount for something that you can get from day 1. Next, let's talk about veggies. Now, vegetable gardens are unique in that they're cheap to buy for the plot, and they will produce more goods depending on how big of a plot you make. However, the downside here is they do require quite a bit of labor. As soon as you put a vegetable plot down, they have to plow everything and seed it. And then when the vegetables are ready, they have to harvest it. However, you only have to plow and seed the first time. After that, these veggies stay in the ground, and then all you do is repick it each year. So the labor is front loaded, but one vegetable garden only costs 15 gold. It is really cheap compared to something else like a chicken coop. This chicken coop's going to give you 1 egg per year. This vegetable garden is going to give you anywhere from 80 to 100 food per year, which is about 8 times more than what the chicken coop does for a fraction of the cost. Now you notice this vegetable garden has a little bit of a weird shape. That's because I reduced the frontage that it takes up. The only useful part of the vegetable garden is the extension in the back. If you make a plot like this, you do have a pretty big area where your vegetable garden is, but you have a lot of wasted space up here, and you probably want to get rid of that so you can put either more houses or more production buildings. The way you get a shape like this is you can either build it into other buildings like this, or my personal favorite is you can just design it with roads. So let's say this is the road that you're building your housing on. You could easily drop a couple vertical roads like this, space them out enough roughly to where you can get your duplex in, and always test it before you do the stuff in the back so you don't waste your time. So you can see right here, this is more than enough. However, this is actually too big. There's a lot of wasted space in here. We can make this even more efficient. So let's bring that in. And you can see here, this is a pretty good size. We'll run with this. Now to get the back half, and this is something that I've taken from another channel, his name is Tacticat. I'll put a link in the description, but he likes to use these corpse pits as placeholders. Now these are really good because you can kind of space these out like this, and then you can build your road around it, and then you can get a very repeatable function for how much veggies and how big you want this thing to be. Now it doesn't have to follow this shape. I like to use this shape for a specific reason. It's because after these are built, I like to go back in and put more housing right next to them, and I can fit a bunch of singles right next to it. I can fit more singles right here. So where this one plot would have been for 2 families and then had a big vegetable garden, I can now fit 8 families in the same space and still have the exact same amount of vegetable gardens. So all we need to do is delete these. We've already outlined it with the road, so you click twice in the front, one in the back corner, and the other in the back corner, and then you're good to go. So that's the shape of that. You can make any shape you want. And again, each of these vegetable gardens should be spitting off right around 100 vegetables each year, sometimes a little bit more, depending if you make it a little bigger in the back. If you make it too big, though, it is slightly inefficient. Like, for example, this one is it's almost 4 corpse pits large, which is pretty large. However, I do have a level 3 Burgage plot, which means there's 4 families working here. They can actually work all this, no problem. I would probably cut this in half for a level 2 or level 1 Burgage plot with only 2 families, because you'll notice when you have this size, the stuff in the back doesn't get worked until you get up to level 3. So you can either plan ahead and make it bigger than you need, or just cut it down and just have smaller ones for now. So again, recap of vegetables. They're cheaper to make than most of the other extensions. They require a bit more labor and a bit more land, but for the cost, they're actually a really good source of food, and I highly recommend using these. Next, let's talk about eggs. We've got quite a few egg production in these buildings. This is a real simple one to talk about. Every Burgage plot, doesn't matter how many families you have, if it's a duplex, if it's a level 3 with 4 families, they all produce 1 egg per month. So 12 eggs per year, and they cost 25 each. Now that is a very expensive cost, so I don't recommend doing eggs in the early stages. They could be a great source of food in the middle and late game when you have an issue with labor. Because the thing with these chicken eggs is there's no labor to produce. They just show up in the pantry and then your granary will come pick it up and put it for sale. So again, eggs are great when you have a lot of money and not a lot of labor or time. Essentially, you're converting your wealth into a food source without having to spend labor to get it. Another food source is apples. They are very similar to the vegetable garden in that the Burgage plot size in the back determines how much yield you get from it. It is different in the sense that you don't have to have any upfront labor cost. You don't have to seed and plow. The trees just show up. And then when you go to pick the apples, it's much less work to pick one apple than it is to pick one vegetable. So these actually go quite a bit faster. However, you only harvest in the month of September. So you need to make sure that you don't have too many apples, because if your workers can't get to them in time, then those apples basically go to waste. They don't get picked and they will never get picked. You can't make these more efficient other than just making them smaller or making them more square-like. So you can see in this town, we have quite a bit of apples. We have 702 apples. We only have this one apple farm and it's been supplying us with quite a bit. We have 300 people in this town. The main downside with apples though is they do cost quite a bit. It's 50 gold and you have to sacrifice a perk point to do it. So orchardry, you don't need any other perks to get to it. It can be done from level 1, but again, it needs 50 gold. And the other caveat there is it takes 3 years for these things to produce their full yield. So if you zoom in right here, you can see all these little trees. You can count them. This one, I believe, is about 120 apples roughly in this area. Every tree produces 1 apple per year once it reaches full maturity. Until that point, so for the first 3 years, it will actually produce half of the yield. So 120 trees will produce about 60 apples for the first, second, and third year. And then after that, you'll see the trees get much bigger and then they will produce the full yield 120. Again, you have to be careful because it is during September when they pick. You might want to be careful of what kind of profession these guys are doing. So in this case, we've got some people all the way up here. Obviously, they're soldiers. There's not much we can do about that, but that means we would miss most of the yield for this year if you have to go campaigning. The other issue is, let's say if you have these people assigned as farmers and they start to plow fields all the way over here, that means to even start their harvest, they have to go all the way back and then start picking. So more than half the month's going to be gone before they even reach the first apple. So sometimes it makes sense to put them in a job that's local, say like this bloomery, or maybe they could be a granary worker, and then they have a very short commute to get to their house, and then they can start picking on time. Let's talk about honey next. This is another one of those that require a perk to get. You can get it from the first point. You don't need to unlock anything else to get to it. However, that perk point is pretty costly for what you get. If you look at the tooltip, it says placing more than 2 will not increase the yield. It's not functioning properly though, because I have a bunch here and they all produce the exact same. They make about 6 honey per month with a single worker in there. More workers does not help it produce more. So have only 1 person in each, have a big lattice of them, as many as you need. They do get picked up by the granary worker. However, only a single honey will ever spawn in here. It will never spawn up to 5. When a granary worker comes out to grab it, they're grabbing 1 at a time and going all the way back. However, if there's somebody actually working the beehive, they will grab the 1 honey by itself and walk it all the way over to the stall and then walk back to grab the next one. So what I would recommend, and I didn't do it right in this one, but I would build these apiaries as close to the market stalls as you can, so that limits the travel time that they have. And again, each one will produce roughly 6 per month, assuming they can get the honey out quickly into the stall and back to collect the next one. So that's honey. I don't usually recommend doing it. It's very expensive to do. It's very labor intensive because getting 6 per month for one family is very, very expensive. And the final section, we'll talk about bread, which comes from farming and comes from wheat. When you go to the windmill, he turns 1 grain into 2 flour, and 1 flour becomes 1 bread. So essentially 1 grain will become 2 bread. So this farm right here will produce about 100 bread at the end of the year. We have 3 people running this. It's a little efficient because having only 1 farm. This windmill can handle many, many farms worth, and then the oven can work year round. So even in the wintertime when the farms aren't running, this guy can be running. You could probably use maybe 3 to 4 farms per windmill and oven. Now let's talk about how this works. I had this set up on a 3-field rotation, 1 farmhouse with a single family. This is the easiest setup to do. If you want to do bigger fields, you just add more families. Each family should be able to handle between 0.6 and 0.7 Morgan of farm field. And again, that equates to roughly 50 wheat and about 100 food per year. So you can kind of do the math based on that. I have this one automated. If you want to do it manually, which is we're going to cover in another section, but if you are going to do this automated, this is about what you can expect. If you do it manually, you can expect a lot more food than this. We need to make sure we have 3 fields of roughly the same Morgan size. 1 year is going to be wheat. 1 year is going to be fallow, and the third year is going to be fallow. You can see it rotates, the wheat goes down, and then it goes down again, and then it'll rotate back up to here on the 4th year. So everything's taken care of here if we just start it like this. You can see in August. Next month will be September. We're going to start to harvest it. Now we can see in September, people will start rushing out here to collect it. And once the whole field is picked, they will eventually take it back to the farmhouse. And then they'll continue to farm the other fields. And then during the off season, they will thresh the wheat into grain, and then that grain will go to the windmill. I'm going to go and delete these so we can see what the threshing looks like. You can see they will slowly convert the wheat into grain, which means the windmill will kick in. And once the windmill kicks in, that means the oven's going to kick in as well, and we'll turn that into food. So the thing that's nice about bread is you don't need any perks to do it. You can pretty much do it in any type of land. This is not rich soil. This is actually really bad soil. You can see this is the worst soil. If we look at Emmer, there's a couple spots that are green, but most of it's red and orange. However, you can usually get more than enough food to feed your people using Emmer. Other things like barley and flax, that's hard to do unless you're in a good soil. But for Emmer, you can pretty much do it anywhere. It's a little bit labor intensive because they have to work the fields and then do all this other stuff. There's a lot of steps in the production chain, but you can scale it up as much as you want, provided you have the room to grow it. And there's not really any downside to farming other than the setup is a little bit complicated, but once you get it set up, you can just forget it and it'll go on its own. So let's recap it and I'll give you my thoughts on which food types are easier to do and which ones are not. Meat is fine in the early game, but once you start getting 10, 20 families, something like that, I would not rely upon it for a reliable source of food unless you have a rich deposit. Even then, the rich deposit's not going to feed a town of 100 families unless you have these 2 perks and you have the policy hunting grounds. However, by doing that, that means you're not getting other perks. And it also means that you're not able to farm because your fields are going to be producing half of what they should. So in general, meat is probably the least desirable food type once you get past the first 5 families. The only time I would recommend taking those perks is if you have a side region that you don't plan on building a big town and you're going to send meat back to your main region. For example, this one, you could pull iron, you can pull wild animals, and you can send everything back to the home territory. You would need to have at least 2 perks for this, 2 perks for this, and now you can see in order to get 4 perks, you actually have to build a decent sized town, and it's kind of not really worth it. I don't usually recommend meat unless you absolutely need it and it's all you have in your territory. Likewise, honey, as you saw before, it has a very slow production rate. You have to spend a perk to get it, and the mechanics behind it are a little funky because they have to take it manually to the stalls, or the granary has to pick it up one at a time. So not really a good source of food. Now, the next food source, I wouldn't say any of these are bad. It just depends more upon what your situation is. If you have a lot of money and you have a little bit of labor available, then I think apples can be a decent choice. They do cost 50 each, and you have to invest a perk point. If your build is very tight and you need that perk point to go, say, into trade, or you're going heavy into the metalworking, I would definitely skip apples. However, if you don't have anything to spend the perk point on and you do still need a food source, apples are very good. 50 gold is really not that bad in the grand scheme of things, and it doesn't require a ton of labor. It is a little bit finicky, so I generally would prefer vegetables over apples just because you don't need a perk point and it's only 15 gold. Now let's talk about the difference between eggs and veggies. I generally, in almost all of my playthroughs, I get veggies first just because you can feed the entire town with a single 15 gold investment. However, in the late game, the eggs are actually better because in the late game, it's assumed that you have a ton of money and you can just outfit every single Burgage plot that doesn't need to be saved for an artisan shop, can all be dedicated to chicken coops, producing a passive yield of food. And basically, you don't have to spend any work on it other than the granary worker to pick it up. So that is a really good one. And you don't need any perks for it. So these are both great. However, they fulfill a different role. Veggies are great for the early game. Eggs are great for the mid to late game. Bread, in my opinion, is viable on any map, even if it doesn't have fertile soil, because you can always get a decent yield. And I believe bread should always be made if you're short on food. However, the best source of food, in my opinion, in the entire game is going to be berries. Berries is always my go-to, assuming I don't start in the wintertime and I can pick them from day one. I would always prefer berries over anything else because not only can you get a ton of them without having to invest any perk points, but when you over-harvest them, you could sell some of that for your starting capital. You can easily get enough money to pay for more extension plots, for more oxen, and they are still viable into the late game because each one is going to produce 300 to 400 per year, or on a big deposit, even more than that. So most of my playthroughs, I usually start with berries, then I move into vegetables and bread, and that'll be 3. And if I need a 4th one, I'll usually either do eggs or apples. Generally, I will default to eggs just because I don't need to spend the perk point for it. But like I said, any of these can work depending you know how they work, which hopefully you do by now. The next section is going to be the starting build order. Now, these tips are going to help you get your town off to a good start, because if you have a bad start, you're always going to be fighting uphill, and that's usually where a lot of people go wrong and they just give up. So let's go default settings on restoring the peace. The first food source you should always go for is going to be the wild animal. We'll want to put down a hunting cabin for that. These cost no resources, so we can do that right off the bat. And we only start with 8 timber, so the first thing we should be doing is getting a logging camp down as close as we can to the trees and close by to where we're going to put houses. We start with only 1 ox, which means we should probably get another ox right away. And because this is the default setting, we do start with 50 gold, and that helps quite a bit. So we'll order another ox, and we'll put 3 people in the logging camp. We need to get our housing up ASAP. We do have some food to rely upon, so we don't need to rush that right now. The main priority is to get our housing so that we can get rid of that homelessness debuff. So we're going to build 3 houses right here, because that's what we have wood for. And again, I'm putting them very close to the logging camp. You can see how short the distance is that the ox has to go. And then as we get more timber, you can see we have enough to do the other 2. We'll have a full set of 5. Always make sure that you have these going such that your oxen are never idle, because that's usually the bottleneck, not the workers, but the oxen themselves. So as soon as you put them down, the oxen are going to start grabbing some logs and putting them down. And because our workers are already here, they're just going to go one after another, assuming there's logs there, and then they'll these houses. That's going to get rid of our debuff from homelessness. So with the last house built, we need to immediately switch over to food production. I'm going to put 2 people on the hunting camp. We have a little bit of timber. We can pull everybody off and start building the other buildings that we need. We're going to need a tannery, and you can keep that right next to the hunting camp. And we're also going to need a woodcutter's lodge so we can get wood up. And then very important, these people do not have supplies until we actually connect it with a marketplace. So we're going to put a small marketplace right here in the center of these 3 buildings. We'll end up moving all of this later. We want to get this down as fast as possible so we can get our approval up, because that means we can get more people moving in, which means we can hire more people in the militia and deal with bandits, raiders, etc. Very, very important to get approval taken care of ASAP. And we put the tannery right next to our hunting camp because that'll allow us to very quickly make clothing. So our food stall is up from the hunting camp. Our tannery made a clothing stall. Our clothing's taken care of. And now we got to get a woodcutter's lodge with somebody in there collecting wood. And then he will create a firewood stall and stock that. Now, very, very important. You can see right here, our approval is 50%. That means we need to get a house right away, because if we don't, we might miss this month's family moving in. So let's get a house. And the other important thing, it did rain on us, so we're going to lose some supplies. But again, that's not really that big of a deal. It's very important to get your approval going so that you can quickly get your immigration. So we'll put our storehouses down right next to it. Hopefully some of these supplies will still be good. Really, the only thing that's important here is the bread. The firewood is no big deal. The tools really couldn't care less about. Losing the bread does hurt a tiny bit, but really it's not that big of a problem. Now you can see right here, the hunting camp, as I mentioned before, you put 2 people on it, they're going to hunt it down really quickly. And as soon as you get to that limit, that 10 limit that we set, we could either drop it down a little lower, maybe 5 or 6. I wouldn't go below that. And then I would pull 1 person off and have them help build other things. And as soon as the granary's up, we put people in there so they can restock and grab this stuff off the floor. And now this is the point. If we're doing the default setting, we get our equipment, we can start a militia, spear militia. I generally don't recommend sending 10 people out though. You're going to want to get more people. So again, our main priority now is to keep our approval up and continue to increase our population. So let's make more housing so when we get that other family, we have another one ready to go. The other thing we need to focus on now is getting our approval up to 75% or higher, because that's going to allow us to increase our population even faster. Between 50 and 74, you get only 1 family. Between 75 and higher, you get 2 families. So the immediate thing we should switch to, once we get a little bit of, we have food, firewood, clothing, everything's covered, nobody's homeless, we have some spare burgage plots. The next focus we should be shifting to is getting a church. Church is going to be pretty big. The only thing we're missing here are going to be wood products. We're going to need some timber, and we're also going to need to get a saw pit right here. Now we got our first person moving in. It is May, so we got it by May. Usually, if you do it right, you can sometimes get it in April too, but May is still not bad. So our saw pit's up. We're going to put somebody in there. We're going to get our planks. There you go. We have enough. We're going to drop the church down. And then as they're building that, we need to discuss what do we do after this. So we have room for 1 more family to move in, which they will move in June. So we probably need to build more housing. Again, you want to stay ahead of that curve, usually by 1 or 2 houses at a minimum. I usually go overboard and build several. So I'll usually build blocks of maybe 5 or 6 houses at a time. And then that usually covers me for a while. Because keep in mind, as soon as this church is done, we're going to get a big approval boost. And then we're going to be easily in the 75% range soon. And then we're going to need 2 houses per month. at least. We got another family, that's 7. The other thing, as soon as you build your church, we need to shift our focus to building a manor house. This is going to do several things for us, but it's going to give us free units to attack with and help defend against raiders and also clearing up bandits. Very, very important to get this as soon as your church is done. There is an argument to be made for getting the manor house first instead of the church. I usually like to go the wooden church first because that'll help you get more militia, which is the easier one to expand. But you could do either one. So we are short stone and we're short planks. We need 9 timber in total before we switch to stone because 4 of those get turned into planks. 5 stay as timber, and then we need to get stone. Now, we've got 9 timber. We can switch somebody over to saw pit. We also need 2 wood for the stone cutter, so we'll actually go up 2 more. There we go. We have our timber. Let's go ahead and put somebody on the saw pit, and you have to be very careful because this guy will chew through your wood extremely quickly. Now, all we're doing is waiting for that stone to tick up, and then we can build the manor house. Now, we do have to be careful. We did reach another family, so we have to be careful to keep expanding. We're going to pause here just to do one more house. We've got all the stone we need. Let's pull everybody off, and we're going to immediately go over to the manor house and plop this down. There you go. Manor house is up, so I'm going to go ahead and pause it, and let's just take stock of where we're at. It's July. It's only been a few months. We already have every single need that everybody needs at a level 1. We've got our church. We've got our manor house. We can field up to 15 militia as well as a retinue, which means we can very easily deal with the bandits. And let's go ahead and do that actually. So we're going to send our spears and our retinue out here to collect all these. Anytime you see a bandit camp pop up, you want to immediately jump on it because this is your early game money. Now, as soon as these guys pop out, you should be slowing the game down. Put your guys on to stand ground. Make sure they're not moving. Have your retinue stand right behind them. So stand ground, facing the enemy, not moving. Retinues safely behind them. Put them on push forward and have them sprint. And as soon as the lines meet, we're going to come around and we're going to flank them and charge from the back. That's going to lower their effectiveness so they do less damage. It's going to tank their morale, and we should be winning this very easily without any losses. We got ourselves a win. We want to get the militia back to the base as fast as possible because they are the ones that are making the town run. If they're not there, that means we're not collecting resources. There's no other bandit camps here, so we're just going to take this one and we'll be done with it. Now, when it comes to taking the bandit camps, you could either send the money to your town or you can keep it to yourself. I recommend taking it in your treasury, keeping it for yourself. There's a few reasons for that. Number 1, you could spend that money on the retinue, which I don't really recommend doing in the early game. You want to save your money because then you can hire mercenaries. If you have to deal with a raid and you don't have enough troops, or if you want to take land from Hildebolt, you could do this very early on because you can spam these units pretty cheaply. So right now it's going to cost us about 120. Yeah, 120 to get 5 units. Plus our spears, plus our retinue. That should be enough to take on Hildebolt for a region. It might be a little bit short, actually. I would probably wait until this guy gets replaced, this local thug. It's a small unit, not really the best at combat. But one other unit, we could easily afford it. We have 200 gold, roughly. So we could definitely do it if we get a better one. So again, spears come back, we disband, everybody goes back to work, and we can continue to expand. Now, I'm not going to continue this much further because I think I pretty much covered everything that you're going to start with. But the most important next step is for you to stop and think about what you want to do with this run and what you have at your disposal. This is where a lot of people get wrong. First, they get flustered and they don't know where to start. If you follow this exact steps, there's nothing I did here that relied on the land. I used a very basic wild animal start. It was a default setting. Everything's standard. What you do after this can be very confusing because there's a lot of options, and I recommend zooming out and looking at what you have at your disposal. So this region has good iron, and it also has good soil. If you don't see 2 rich resources, it means the other one is going to be your soil. So you can see here we could easily grow barley, flax, and emmer. So we could do a lot here. This is actually one of the best starting regions that you can possibly get. Having starting iron, and then you can produce all the ale and food that you need. The clothing, you can get up a lot of industry in the region like this. You can build this town up to 1,000 all by itself without needing outside influence. So in this case, I would probably go the route of a little bit of farming, deep mining, and then maybe some armor. Probably wouldn't spend it too much elsewhere. I would probably focus on these and then go that route. So the first thing you'd want to do at this point is expand your population. Make sure you keep housing up to snuff. You're going to want to get as many berries as you can. You're going to need to replace this wild animal as a food source, which means you need to get something else. You don't have a whole lot of money in the beginning, so that means you need to focus if you watch the last tip section. The next one you could do is veggies. That's very cheap to do. We can do 2 veggie farms because we have 30 gold. Or what I would more likely recommend doing is start bread farming. So you're going to want to start a farm, and we could actually do it right now. it's July. As long as we get our farming going before September, we could easily plow and sow and be ready to harvest again in, say, May or June next year. And we would have a full set of food then. And again, to do this, we just need free timber, and then we can set up some fields and you're off to the races. Let's say if you had a more difficult start, let's pick a really bad region. So this Selbitz is terrible. It has double rich wild animals, which is fine. That's good for the early game, but it has stone deposit, which is completely useless. You only need stone for 3 or 4 different buildings, and after that, it's completely useless. You can't sell it because it's only 1 gold each. Really bad region. However, you could still make this work. What I would do in this situation is I would keep my population low in terms of Burgage plot tiers. I would keep everybody tier 1 and maybe go to tier 2 only to get a couple artisan shops. But for the most part, you're going to want to get a big population quickly and keep them very low because you're not going to be able to produce a whole lot of ale or other things. You have very limited weapons with iron deposit of 228. So that means you probably are going to need to get your militia and your retinue out quickly, take some bandit camps, and then very quickly expand into a new region, which you will do if you take out a few bandit camps, you can do that. But you're going to need to look for a better home than this. So I would probably look around and see what's available. This region has clay deposit rich, which is good for money, and it also has good soil. And it's directly across the street from this region. So if I own this region, I would be looking to start expanding into here. Again, this one has all the good stuff that you need. And then if you need other things, you could always use the money you make from the clay to buy more iron and buy more weapons and all that. Or you could expand into another region and get an iron deposit rich region and start sending resources there, which we'll cover in a new tip section. But again, very important thing is to figure out before you just go off and mindlessly build things. Pause the game, think about what you want to do, and then work from there. I don't want to spend too much time in this, but this is kind of like a bonus tip. If you're interested in doing more challenging runs, I'm going to show you a build order that'll work pretty much every time, starting on winter with no starting supplies, demanding requirements, and high penalty for approval. This build order is so crucial that if you get it wrong, you will lose the game within the first 2 months. Let's get started. And we got pretty fortunate here. We do have a close berry deposit, wild animals, rich resource, and clay deposit close by. However, we don't have enough supplies to build anything to take advantage of it. You have to immediately put down your logging camp, and you need to put it nearby all the other stuff, and then you need to put down a hunting camp, preferably 2 since they're free and we have a rich resource. It's probably worth it to do it that way, and then you should put 1 person on each. As soon as the logging camp's done, we need to make sure that we don't farm logs from our berry pit. That's going to be a problem. So we're going to set our limited work area and we'll move it slowly as we need it. But the first thing we're doing is trying to get 2 timber so we can build a single house. Now you don't want to build more than 1 house, just build a single house. Don't build 2. And while that's being built, we have enough timber to make our clothing. We're going to build the tannery right next to our hunting camps. And as soon as that first house is done, we need to build a marketplace, and it's going to be right in the middle of all these other buildings because they need to have very quick access to it. We only need 3 stalls to make it big enough to fit 3. We're going to want to get another house going while those are being built. And then after that, we're going to want to get a woodcutter's lodge. And then as wood comes in, we're going to be putting more houses down. So we got our 5 houses. We're not going to need to build more than that because our approval is going to be very, very bad for quite a while. So don't build past 5 houses. Your time is better spent doing other things like preparing to build the church. Now we'll put people in the woodcutter's lodge and the tannery, and that's going to allow them to open up stalls. And you'll see that we do get some bonuses here for that. So if you make it to this point, the second month, and you have all these things going, you have all 3 stalls, you have 5 houses, you pretty much are out of the danger zone. You're not going to have people leave. If you miss any of these, you will very quickly go to below 25 approval and people start leaving and you're just not going to recover. You have to restart again. So very important. Now the next step, I'm not going to cover this in too much detail because it's the same thing we did in the other one, but you need to build a stone cutter camp. You need to build a saw pit. And then you need to make sure you get enough supplies to do both the manor house, which I recommend doing the manor house first, because then you're going to use those units to go clean up some of these camps. And then you use that money to buy hire mercenaries to actually kill them. And then you're going to have plenty of influence and money. You can start expanding from there. And then as soon as that's done, the next thing you need to work on is a church, because you're not going to get any positive immigration if you don't have a church. That is the absolute requirement. Once you get the church up, then you start to build houses and you start to expand from there like a normal playthrough. So that's pretty much how you survive the hardest start. For the next section, let's talk about optimizations. The first thing we'll talk about in this section is where to place your production buildings. So with farms, it's pretty obvious you want to follow the areas that have high fertility. But on top of that, it's very important to make sure that you have production buildings near the farm so that they don't have a big travel distance. For example, if this is the center of our town, we don't want to put our farmhouses right here because then there's a massive travel distance to get to the fields and all the way back. So anytime they harvest something, they're going to have to pick up stuff and travel all the way back there. And in the time they're doing that back and forth, it means it's less time for them to pick up other fields. And it's also more time that the crops will be on the field and get rained on. So obviously you want to have your farmhouse right next to, if not touching, the fields that they're going to be harvesting. In this case, I built 3 right here. It's fine. I probably should have built some over here. This is slightly unoptimized, although I did build one here eventually. This does a couple things for you. It gives people a place to drop supplies off. And the more production buildings you have, the more options you have to spread your people out around. And also in this case, with the farm building, you can have more plow stations. So obviously, if I have only one farmhouse and I have all 8 people working there, it's not as efficient as if I have 8 people working at 8 different farmhouses that are spread out all over the map and close to the areas that they're farming. And let's look one level further. So we have our farmhouse right here. The wheat from the farmhouse is going to eventually go to a windmill. Now I put the windmill close to the farmhouse and I turn off, if you look at the granary, I turn off accepting wheat, grain, and flour. Now this is going to do a couple things. As soon as these goods touch the farmhouse or the windmill, the granary worker is going to come over here, take it, and then take it all the way back to the granary. Then let's say the windmill needs to get grain. As soon as the farmhouse is out of grain, they have to travel all this way, all through the loop to get the grain, and then travel all the way back, take it back to the windmill. And then let's say the granary worker again comes all the way, grabs the flour from the windmill after it mashes the grain into flour, and then they take it all the way back. Now again, the communal oven needs the flour, so they have to go all the way back, grab it, come all the way back. So it's a massive, massive waste of time. So generally what you want to do is you want to keep all your production localized until you get to the final product, or you get to at least a reasonable product where you have other production centralized somewhere else. So for example, everything's here except for bread. So the bread will eventually go back to the granary. So this granary is allowed to grab the bread. So they can take the final product back. There's no middleman anywhere. They just take it very close by. Likewise, I have a brewer and I have a tavern here. I have a malt house. So I have everything I need to get beer for this entire region, all localized into this area. If I had the brewery, which obviously the brewery has to be in a Burgage plot, it has to be an artisan extension. If I had the brewery up here, these guys would have to travel all the way up here to grab the malt and then take it back. And then again, that malt would have to be taken all the way to the tavern. We'd have to move a bunch of stuff over here. So it's not really all that efficient. It's better if the barley goes to the farmhouse and stays at the farmhouse until the malt house has a chance to go next door to grab it, turns it into malt. Then the brewery goes across the street to grab it and then brings it here and doesn't have to travel far. And then same thing, the tavern just has to go around the corner to grab it and restock it at the tavern. Everything's very close. We cut out the middleman. Every time you have a granary worker or a storehouse worker go to grab something, that's one extra person that's adding a touch to that product, and it's making it less efficient. Which sometimes it's okay to do that, but in this case, I set it up so we didn't have to. Now, there are some instances where you're going to have artisan workshops in the middle of your towns, and sometimes it's okay. So for example, right here, I have the joiner workshop. This guy is producing a bunch of shields so we can sell it on the market. Now to get shields, we need planks, and our storehouse is right here, just completely stuffed with planks. We have 1,163 planks. This guy can get as many as he needs, and he's only a very short stroll away from it. Now again, if you really wanted to optimize this, I guess you could find out where your sawmill is, which is right here. We could build the Burgage plot right here, and he'd be right across the street, and he can just grab it directly from there. The problem with that is you'd have to turn off the storehouse from taking planks, which means you would only ever have as many planks as this thing can hold, which is 50 right here. So you can't go over 50, and if you do, the rain will come and wipe out your oversupply. So some instances, it does actually make sense to have the storehouse take it, and in other instances, it doesn't. Let's talk about wood production, because that is actually one of the biggest issues that a lot of people have. Once you get past the point where you've chewed through all your forest. Like this whole area was forested at one point, and we've completely clear cut it. Same thing with here, although I set up a forester hut here, and this forester hut regrew this whole area. Now I had to turn off my woodcutter because you can see we have 790 firewood. This number was actually closer to 1,500 at one point, and I ran out of storage space right here. You can see this between these two storage spaces, we have 5,000. We only have 1,500 left, and 750 of that was this firewood at one point, and then I turned them off. So you could see if you don't set up your storage spaces correctly, and you overproduce, that can be a problem as well. But let's talk about wood first. So in this area, I had a logging camp. I had another logging camp over here. So there's 2 logging camps. I'm going to put them right where they are. And then I have a 3rd logging camp down here. So you can see they're nice and spread out so that they aren't eating the same trees. And they're spread out nicely. So if I build a building in any of these 3 corners, they have a supply of logs that they can get to very quickly without having to go to, like, say, one central location. Like if I were to build a farmhouse out here, they could go to this one. That'd be pretty close. This one's not too far. And it just makes it much more efficient. Now, what I do recommend, once you start to get far away from your base and the trees are taking a really long time to get back to your logging camp or your woodcutter's hut, you're going to want to build a forester hut. And then you're going to go to your advanced tab and limit the work area. You see, I already did that here. And the work area for this guy is pretty big. Not too big because we have to be careful not to chew through the berries. And we don't want to scare away the hunt. So I made the circle big enough to where it's actually meaningful. We're going to get a decent amount of trees, but not too big to where we're going to eat through our other resources and cause problems there. And if you look down here, I did the same thing. This was all clear. You can kind of tell where the circle is because it's like a perfect circle. And in the base game, they generally don't make perfect circles. Like if you look at the tree line on the back here, I haven't touched. And then right here, it's like a perfect circle because it takes all the trees in a radius. And then same thing when you plant trees, it plants in a perfect radius. So you'll see a nice circle of trees. So you can see right here, it's pretty well set up. We can get our log camp running and take a bunch of trees. I also have a woodcutter's lodge, and you can see right here, he's already chewed through some of his supply, but he has a lot still going for him. And that's because, as I mentioned, the forester hut is making a giant radius. So this guy's always got fresh trees to harvest. You basically set it and forget it. Now, when it comes to some of the Burgage plot extensions, for example, we've got veggies and we've got chicken coops with the eggs. A lot of these houses right here have eggs. This house has the veggies. These are all going to get picked up by the granary. Now, you don't want to have them too far from the granary, so these are actually a reasonable length. It won't take them too long to get to these houses. But let's say if we had houses all the way down here, this would not be a very good location to put eggs unless we built something to pick them up. So what if we were to do this, we would want to build a granary specifically in this area, and then we would want to go to the granary advanced tab, and we would want to limit the work area and have them just work in this area. And then we would probably also want to go to the advanced tab and limit to what they're actually able to pick up. In this case, he would only be focusing on eggs right here and nothing else. So we turn everything off, only allow eggs. And then I know I covered this in the other section, but in case you didn't watch it, you're also going to want to put down a marketplace so they can get those eggs to the people that are going to eat them. Make sure you have a setup that minimizes distance traveled and also makes a lot of sense. If this granary worker had to travel all the way out here once per house, it would take him a really long time to clear all 5 of these. So probably not really a good setup. Now let's go over another setup because we talked about farming. We talked a little bit about the artisan shops. Let's talk about mining. Now, this is pretty much as optimal as you get when it comes to the rich deposits with the infinite source. So we do have the perk here that allows us to basically upgrade the deep mine that gives us infinite iron. You can only fit 2 on each mine. You used to be able to fit 4. They patched it. Now it's only 2. But 2 is still very good. We've got 4 workers in each, and we are completely surrounded by bloomeries. You can see we got a bunch of these, and then we have 2 smithies that are making tools for us, and then more bloomeries over here. So this is pretty well optimized, actually. So we have 8 workers, and I have 9 bloomeries, although at one point I had these 2 working back here, and I think I was letting the iron supply stock up just a little bit. So again, you'll notice that we don't have any large storehouse that's going to pick up supplies. This storehouse is basically picking up the iron slab. Now that iron slab will eventually make its way over here to the armorers. Now, if I were to do this again, I probably would have specifically built Burgage plots up here so that they were closer, just so that they didn't have to get that travel distance. Unfortunately, I had not thought about that before I did it. I probably could have put them right here. They'd be a little bit closer, but even then, that's still a little bit inefficient. You might want to just put them basically touching whatever your production building is. So something like this. And then they could just literally cross the street, grab what they need, and come back. And then again, you have your storehouse only accepting the final products. So iron slabs, or in this case, we would probably turn everything off and only accept the armor that we're creating. Now that brings up another interesting point. We have a trading post all the way up here because this is where the King's Road is. Now, once you start paying for trading routes, you don't need to do this. But if you're trying to just get some passive trading without having to pay for the trade routes, you can still set up your trade routes. We'll cover that in a second, but it has to be on the King's Road. So if you want to do this efficiently, you do need to set up a little bit more complicated network. So you'll notice we have a trading post here, we have a storehouse, and then 2 large storehouses. Each of these are meant to pick up all the goods that are going to be sold. So these storehouses basically come all the way down here, and as soon as these tools are made, they grab them from here, and as soon as the armor's made, it grab them from each of these. And they take them all the way back up here so that whoever's working the trading post only has to go across the street, grab the goods to restock, and then they're back in here. And then same thing, I built a smaller one that only focuses on plate armor because they were only picking up these items. So generally what happens is there's an order of operations that they will pick up items, either both for selling, importing, and exporting. They will generally go from the construction tab top down first, crops tab, food next, and crafting, and so on and so forth. So generally, the more expensive items will get picked up last, which is why it sometimes makes sense to have a storehouse that is dedicated just to that item so they can bring it up here. Now, I didn't upgrade this because we're only going to be producing maybe 20 or 30 of these per month, so we don't need a big storage, and just one worker will bring it up here, and then these trading post workers will put it in there. The flip side here is if you don't really care about the passive trade route and you're only just paying for trade routes, and that's the main source of your income, it does not make sense to do this. It's much better to destroy all this stuff and relocate your trading post closer to where your storages are. So for example, I've got storage here that's got some plate armor and some shoes. We could sell all that. We've got another storehouse down here that has a ton of armor. So anywhere in this region would be a reasonable spot. Probably even down here so that they can be right next to the storehouse and then really ramp up the production of selling all that stuff. And that also means that you need to have less people working it because they can restock it faster, and then you can have more people doing production. And then finally, let's talk about this ale house that we have down here, this tavern. So you'll notice we don't really have any farms. We do have a farm only for wheat, but this area actually doesn't have any ale production whatsoever. So what I did in this case is, let's say for example, if you had to trade for your own ale and you were just bringing it in, you would want to have a dedicated granary down here, and their whole job is only to grab ale, and that's it. So you grab it, they come down here, bring it, and then that's literally their whole job. And then likewise, the tavern is right next to them, and they can resupply it. So this large granary would have to go to either the trade post or wherever it is. In this case, the trade post is up here, and that's why I have it all the way down here, because the tavern needs to be close to the people for them to drink. So I set the limited work area, and he's only able to grab ale, and I set the work area just like that, and that allows me to move these items all the way down there. So sometimes it makes sense to just relocate the trading post. Sometimes it doesn't, and this is a way to work around it. You can just have granaries set up or storehouses with restrictions so that they're only accepting that item and they're only working in specific areas to make sure that they don't grab it elsewhere. I also made sure that this other granary does not accept ale. Now you can see there's still a few that sneak in there. That's just how it is. This game likes to do that sometimes. But for the most part, they're not taking ale here. So they're not going to go steal it back from the tavern, and they're not going to get it from this trading post first. Now let's talk about burgage plots for a second. When does it make sense to make a single family, and when does it make sense to make a double family or a duplex? There's pluses and minuses to both. However, my personal opinion is I like to have everything possibly be a single family, except for certain things that are going to have extensions in the back, like vegetable gardens or apple orchards. Those are really good to have duplexes because you can make these even bigger, and you only have to have 1 or 2 of them, and they'll feed your entire town. However, the problem with having duplexes for some of these other things, let's say, for example, we have a joiner's workshop. Oftentimes, you'll notice that your production for whatever they're making is just really, really crazy, and you can't possibly sell as many items as they're making, and they just eventually clog your whole inventory. You have to just shut it down, delete the storehouse so things can rot on the floor. It's just a huge mess, and it's kind of a pain to deal with. So what I would generally recommend doing for this is a single. Imagine if this was a duplex, it'd be twice as fast. So you have to pause the building to stop the production. So again, if we had a duplex here, that means that that family would be producing twice as much, but we would not be able to use them as labor. So when we pause this building, we lose their production value. So I generally don't recommend duplexes for artisan workshops unless you're doing something like a brewery. This brewery has the expanded living space. We could put a duplex here at any moment. I didn't do it yet because we didn't ramp up the malt production yet. Actually, we do. We have 256 waiting. So this would actually be a perfect opportunity to do the duplex, because now we're going to double the output of our ale and we have a lot of supplies just waiting for it. But in general, most artisan shops you probably want to keep as a single family, and you generally don't want to go up to level 3 because level 3 basically means that there's 2 families working it. You have to feed these people, and it's more people to get pissed off if you don't satisfy all their needs, and you're going to be pausing their production most of the time anyways because you don't want to be producing with 2 families. You really only want to produce with 1 on most of the artisan workshops. The other thing about single and duplexes, let's say for example this one is producing eggs. This is a single family and it produces 1 egg per month. Even though there's technically it's a level 3, there's 2 families here, but let's say this Burgage plot level 2. This has 1 family living in it and it still produces 1 egg. So it doesn't matter if it's single family, double family, 4 family, they all produce 1 egg per Burgage plot. Which means if these were duplexes, that means you'd have twice the families and half the production. So if you're trying to sustain food with chicken coops, you need to have single families because then you can have twice as many egg production buildings, basically be able to keep up with your population. Let's say you don't need that many, but let's say you also want to build some goat sheds. Now, if you have duplexes, you can only afford to have either eggs or goats, but not both. If you do single families, you could technically do both. So that's why you just have more options with single families than you do duplexes. Duplexes it's a pretty big commitment. Now, the other argument for doing duplexes, when you go to upgrade these buildings, this one to go from level 2 to level 3 is going to cost us 25 gold, 8 planks, and 4 tiles. That's pretty expensive. If I have a single family and I upgrade it, I'll end up with 2 families. If I upgrade a duplex, it costs the exact same, 25 gold, 8 planks, and 4 tiles, but I'm going to get 4 families instead of just the 2. So you actually reduce your upgrade costs by half when they're all duplexes. So there is a benefit there. The other thing that is, it could be a plus and it could also be a minus. It depends on your perspective and how you like to play. When you operate your market, remember we talked in the market section, your supply is based on how many Burgage plots you have, not how many families you have. So if you have 10 Burgage plots that are all single family, you have 10 supply for 10 families. If you have 10 duplexes, you still have only 10 supply, but you have 20 families to feed. Clothing is not a big deal. Fuel is not a big deal because these are all based on the Burgage plot and not the families. Food, on the other hand, is based only on the families and not the Burgage plots. So again, you're going to have twice the consumption rate with half of the limit. So it's a lot easier to get knocked off of that 100% and have a lot more pissed off people if you don't keep it. So that's one thing to consider when you're deciding between single family or duplexes when it comes to efficiency. In the final section we'll talk about in regards to optimization are the perks. There's 4 sections of perks, but they're not always closely related. So for example, sometimes it makes sense to get the heavy plow, but not go up the rye cultivation. Like just because you go farming doesn't mean you should put all your perk points in this top part. Or same thing, it doesn't mean you should do all trade. Sometimes just the first perk is the only one you need. Let's take one area for example. So this area has wild animals and stone deposit. This is about as bad as it gets. This is like the worst possible start. However, I did take all the perks for the trapping, advanced skinning, and pelt extraction. This will give us a decent meat production as well as pelt and hides production so we can build leather, make a bunch of shoes. And you can see that's what we ended up doing. We have a pretty big shoe production line. We have a lot of leather saved up. Actually, I forgot to unpause our cobbler because often in this playthrough what ended up happening is I had about 500 shoes saved up and it was just clogging up all the inventory. So now we have leather clogging up, so we got to unpause our cobbler. But you can see we were only able to do that because we were taking the trapping with the pelt extraction, and that gave us a ton of hides extra. We also took the policy for hunting grounds at one point, and that allowed us to get a pretty decent stack. And then on top of that, we supplemented it by doing goat sheds to get even more hides, and that allowed us to make a ton of money. This town is sitting at 32,000 in regional wealth, which is pretty good. But the problem is, this region, I couldn't really decide where to put these other points, and you can see I have 3 points. I haven't spent them because I don't really need them. I guess I could have put heavy plow, but it didn't really make a whole lot of sense because we weren't doing a lot of farming. I should have probably put it in trade logistics because I did open a lot of trade routes. But you can see even without taking this perk, we still made really good money. So it's not always necessary. And what I probably should have done is just not upgraded this town past the first 3. The first 3 is all I needed. And then everything after that is just kind of a waste. Because if you're on the new patch, you're going to have to pay a royal tax based on how many people you have and how many families you have. So right now we're at the highest level Actually, not every family, every person you have. So it's 5 gold per person. So we have 131. This town costs over 500 gold per year. So it's pretty expensive. And if I had not upgraded, I would have optimized better by knowing what perks I want. And then I would have been able to stop upgrading at that point and then been just fine. And that would have cut this cost down nearly in half, because at a level 3, the cost would be 3 per person instead of 5. So not quite half, but close to it. And that would have saved quite a bit of money. And like I said, we have the perks to spend. I just have nothing to spend them on because we have everything set. This town is good to go. I don't need to touch it. And now we're just wasting 200 gold a year just for not planning properly ahead. Now let's look at it one where I did plan it a little bit better. So this is Hofstetten, where we have mostly the perks down here on the industry tab. So we got charcoal burning, deep mining. Obviously, you can see we already blew through the 4,000 that we started with. We have 2 mines that are producing a constant stream of iron. And we have a bunch of industries that are making all kinds of armor, and that armor is getting shipped up here and sold. And you can see we have 27 grand in the regional wealth. Very nice. And this town is actually much later built than this one. So this town had more time to build up its prosperity. This one actually makes more money than the other town, even though it's smaller. It's not as highly developed. You can see we have a lot less tier 3 plots. And I also didn't go for the 6th one because there's no need. Why spend the extra money when I don't need it? I have plenty of food. This town is perfectly fine on food. We don't have any of these resources. We could technically do the trade logistics, but it's only going to save us temporary money, whereas doing the upgrade to the next level of town is going to cost us permanently extra money per person. So that doesn't really make sense. Or at least to me, it didn't make sense. And finally, let's look at this last one. This is a region that has rich berries, and it has farming. Now you'll notice I kept this town very small. It has only a single perk, the heavy plow, because this is a farm heavy region. You'll notice that most of these houses are not upgraded. These are all level 1. I have only a couple duplexes here, and they're upgraded all the way to level 3. But if you look right here, we still haven't even hit large village. We're still on the 2nd upgrade. So small village is where you build your first 5 houses, and then medium village is basically 10, and then you need 2 of those to be tier 2 Burgage plots. I specifically did not upgrade more than 5 because I did not want to pay the extra money because we don't need it. We've got plenty of money on these other regions. This region is doing only farming. There's nothing else here that it needs. And it produces roughly, I think it's 1,500 ale per year, which is a tremendous amount. I'm basically using this region to ship all the ale to both of these other big towns that have struggle with keeping up the ale production. And again, this town is only level 1, which means each person costs only 1 gold per year. So this whole town cost me 114 gold. It's a very small chunk of this 1,400. You can see most of the cost is actually coming from Goldhof. Like I said, this was a very inefficient choice on my part. So I learned my lesson, did it the right way here, and you can see we have a massive amount of production with a very, I wouldn't want to say it's a small population, but it's a very underdeveloped population, but it's serving its purpose because I thought ahead, I picked the right perks, I set a plan, and I'm working the plan. And then I mentioned before the berries, the rich deposit the berries. You absolutely do not ever need to take forest management. This is such a waste of a perk. You will get more than enough berries. Actually, this one we had to stop harvesting berries because it was clogging up our granary. And I couldn't sell it because the other 2 towns are selling berries already. And the price is all messed up in this area. So basically, we have an extra perk point that we could spend, but we've got nowhere to spend it on. So let's talk about some of these perks that I did not touch on. Now, foreign supplier is good if you're having trouble keeping firewood and bread. This is generally like a noob trap. This is something that you take if you're new and you just don't know how to do it. If you set up your town properly from the start, you will never ever need this. So I generally don't recommend taking this, except in dire emergencies where you just can't keep your people fed or warm. Trade logistics and better deals can be okay if you plan on doing a massive amount of trading, but then I had mentioned before, if you trade enough, you're going to make up that difference anyway. So it saves you 50% from the opening cost of that trade route. It's a one-time fee that you save, but your trade route runs forever, right? So as long as you're playing, that trade route runs. So it's just a matter of spending an extra couple months to make up the difference. So I generally don't like these trade perks. They can help you a little bit in the early game, but once you get to the mid and late game, it's basically a wasted perk because you're already at that point where it doesn't even matter because you're going to have 10, 20, 30,000 gold. So what if you save 500 in the beginning? It doesn't even matter. And then same thing, better deals. It reduces your tariff by 5 instead. It used to be 10 and it was really good. Now it's only 5. So things are still really expensive to import. And I recommend making everything you need rather than importing it, except on some small occasions if you're trying to buy one-off items. Like one reason that you would want to use this is maybe to import weapons or to import clothing. If you're trying to import something every single month, this is probably not a good way to do it. You're better off just conquering a new region or expanding production in the ones that you have to make up for it. We kind of already talked about these. Deep mining is necessary if you have ore rich or clay rich deposit. Those are really good. Charcoal is really good for fixing your firewood problems. It's also good as a product to sell. So these sell for 5 each. And you get it by making firewood, right? You feed firewood into it, which is basically an infinite source. So charcoal burning can be a really good source of early money. It's something you can get right off the bat. And it also keeps all of your production buildings firing. It basically makes your firewood more efficient. Now, the armor making can be good if you have to equip your soldiers with better armor, but even better, I would definitely go this route for any region that has the deep iron deposit, because then you can infinitely sell these for a ton of money. As you can see, we were up to like 30 grand. I think it only took maybe 4 or 5 years to get there. So a very, very fast way of making money. Now over here, you would only ever take these trapping perks if you have a rich animal deposit. And even then, I would really reconsider, unless it's like a very temporary throwaway region that you only plan on making 10 families. Just a temporary place to maybe take some meat back to another town that can use it. I would probably not put this on a main town like I did in this run. It's just not worth it. You could easily put those perks somewhere else and get a lot more use out of it. Forest management is a completely useless perk. It's better to have a lot of people on your berry bushes when they're in the growth phase. You do not need berry deposits. Forest management, don't take this. Beekeeping is okay if you absolutely have no other way of finding another food source. However, I don't recommend it because you only get 6 food per person worked, which is a very inefficient food source. You can do much better with others. And it's also a little funky to work with. You have to build everything really close to your stalls. And then don't ever take advanced beekeeping right now because it's currently not working. It's not really in the game. So don't take this. So again, most of the stuff on this side, not really that useful. Apple orchardry, this is one of my favorite perks. I do take this quite often because it helps satisfy. If you have those towns that have the level 3 burgage plots, you need 4 different food types, and apples can be a really good source. They only cost 50 each. You're probably going to need 2 or 3 total in your whole town, and that'll supply everybody with apples for even a really big town. So this is a good one. Sheep breeding is okay if you plan on going the animal route. You can have a ton of animals breeding, and it'll just multiply exponentially at some point. You'll have too many animals, you won't even know what to do with them. So this can be good. Probably needs to be balanced, to be honest. I generally don't take it because it's kind of boring, but it is a good one. Heavy plow, if you're in a region with rich soil, you have to take heavy plow. It is really silly not to do it. And there is an argument to be made for taking it in regions that even don't have rich soil, because you can still get a decent yield of bread. If you have a small enough town, you can definitely supply the ale that they need if you have a heavy plow to help you out. Bakeries is one that I'm not a big fan of. Bread is pretty easy to come by to begin with. Most of the time I end up skipping a year or two because I have so much bread saved up. So this bakery extension basically turns one of your artisan workshops into a bakery, and it turns 1 flour into 2 bread. The communal oven that you have normally built will turn 1 flour into 1 bread. This one does twice the efficiency. So every 1 wheat that you produce, if that wheat goes through the bakery extension, it will turn into 4 bread. So instead of 2 to 1, it's 4 to 1. Again, bread is very rarely an issue, so I generally don't find this to be all that useful. Fertilization allows you to get a little bit faster fertility regeneration, which can be okay. If you're doing crop rotation, this is useless because your fertility is going to always be back up anyways, because that's how your rotation works. But if you're doing it manually, you could probably squeeze out an extra harvest once in a while by doing this. I generally think this is a complete waste, though. I almost never take it. Irrigation lowers the amount of damage caused by droughts. I had instances where I had 2 droughts back to back and I had no ale for those 2 years, and it pissed a lot of people off. So there is an argument to be made. This is almost like an insurance policy more than anything else. However, my personal opinion is I would rather save up an extra year or half a year worth of supplies rather than spend a perk point to avoid a drought, have my supplies basically covering exactly what I need. If you save extra, you can have a drought and you'll still have some extra resources to fall back on. So I've never taken this perk before other than to just test it, but generally I don't recommend it. And then rye, this one, I guess if you're hurting for bread, if you're in a region that doesn't have rich soil and you really need to make a lot of bread, this could be useful. I've never personally taken it other than to test because I've never had an issue with bread even on bad soil. So again, mostly wasted. I would not take it. Now let's talk about how to make money. We're going to start with the easiest and most obvious ways and then work our way up to the little bit more complicated ones. So starting off with bandit camps. This is pretty much how you're going to get your early economy going. So you can see in this, we have a starter region. We've got our starting 20. Always remember to keep your spearmen on stand ground. Let the bandits run into your line and then switch them to push forward as soon as they meet. And you shouldn't lose any troops if you do that. So pretty easy fight. Don't forget to put your guys back on stand ground. And one thing that I've gotten a lot of complaints with is people clicking on a bandit camp and then not actually doing it. Sometimes what happens is your unit gets spread out. And so when you click, half the units over here, half the units over here. So the unit doesn't actually touch the bandit camp even though you clicked on it. The way to fix this is to right click and drag your line right across that bandit camp and then click on the bandit camp. So that'll force everybody, if they're split up because of whatever bug is going on, you can force them to group up like that, and then you'll walk right on top of the camp. So this allows us to make two types of money. You can either send it to your town or you can send it to the treasury. Really depends on what you're trying to do. We'll send it to the town, and that adds right to directly to our regional wealth, so we can spend that on upgrades. We can buy chicken coops. We can order more oxen and do whatever we need to do. The other thing, before I move on to the trading aspects, one thing that you're going to want to do with these guys is, let's say, for example, if we just got beat pretty badly, or what if we only had our retinue? If we had only 5 units, there's no way you can take on 16 brigands. So what you're going to want to do is called the bait. You want to bait them out and then kite them around. So let's speed this up till we get in range. Let's say if we only had our 5 starting militia, we would definitely not be able to take this fight. So what you're going to want to do is, as soon as you see them come screaming out after you, move away and then circle around. These guys will never catch you if you have enough distance so that they don't sprint, and you keep slowly turning the circle in so that you can get in. Now, you also want to make sure you're not sprinting and save your stamina, because if they do charge after you, you're going to need to sprint to get away and avoid getting caught. And again, if they're getting too close, just sprint a little bit, get a little distance, and then you can always save your stamina. Again, we're going to drag our line across the floor. We're going to take this. And again, if we only had our 5 militia, what we could easily do now is we could take this into our personal treasury. Now we have 123 gold. We could easily come in here, hire a mercenary. These local thugs are more than enough. You just need enough to take the bandit out. You don't need anything else. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull these guys all the way back. We're going to have our mercenaries go fight them, but we'll keep our retinue close by. Well, in this case, it's the spearmen, but if this were the retinue, we would just have them come back here, charge in at the last second to make sure that we win the fight. But we don't want to go in right away and take any losses. We want to let the mercenaries take the losses. So now it costs us 15 gold, but we got 123, so we still have 108 left over. We could easily hire another mercenary group next month. We can hire these ones from Selbits. We get two units. And remember, we're going to have more bandit camps that pop up. So you can easily use that money to kite people around, hire the mercenaries, do whatever you got to do. You could also put that money back into the retinue and then have a good retinue that can handle their own against any bandit camp. Then you wouldn't have to hire mercenaries. It's just really costly. That's the best way to get your early economy going, either regional wealth. I usually prefer to take things into treasury and just use trade for the regional wealth, which is what we're going to talk about now. Now, I went ahead and set up a scenario here just to prove a point. There's 2 ways to do trading, and a lot of people think that you have to have a ton of money. You have to open up a bunch of trade routes. That's the only way you're ever going to make any money. So what I did is I have a very basic starter village, right? We have 5 families, no extra immigration. We have only the starting buildings. We have a tannery, a saw pit, and a trading post. And obviously the necessities like the woodcutter's lodge. So what we're going to do is we're going to sell all the little things that we can that we are not required to open a trading route for. So we can sell all of our planks. We're going to sell this all the way to 0. We set it to export. I'm going to put our reserve at 0 because we don't need any planks right now. We just want to make a little bit of cash. We have hides. We're not converting them into leather because you do need a trade route for leather. So you want to make enough leather so that your people have clothing, and then stop the tannery. Put it on export, and then drop this to 0 again. We can sell all of that. We also have some spare firewood. We have 71. We don't need that much. Let's probably keep maybe 20. So just these few things. We could also actually sell some of our food, maybe the berries, because berries are really easy to get a lot of. I would probably recommend selling berries, but I would keep a decent reserve because you don't want to run out of food. But I would probably put more people on the berry pickers right now just to get that going. But I'm going to let this run, and I think you guys will be completely shocked at how much money you can make in 1 year with the 5 starting people and nothing extra. No trade routes, no nothing. You just make sure that your trading route is on the King's Road. And real quick point on that, if you hold Alt, when you go into the road making selection, if you hold Alt, it'll tell you King's Road cannot remove. Whereas if I'm going to remove a road that I made, it'll tell you you can remove it. So King's Road is obviously the one that you can't remove. So always make sure your trading post is on the King's Road, because this will allow wandering merchants to come by and pick up the items that are for sale and then move on. Now, they do less volume than the traders that you have to purchase, but they're completely free. As long as you're on the King's Road, they will stop by. You can do the same thing if you're importing as well. So you can, let's say we needed to get some stone and we don't have money to open a trade route. We could just set this reserve and then they'll come by and drop stuff off. Let's let it run for a year and we'll see how much money we made, starting with 0 regional wealth. I did a full year from the start of the game, not until we actually built our first trading post in June. So technically it's only 7 months. But even then, only 7 months, we made 459. This is, again, keep in mind, we have 5 people. We don't have any advanced industry. All we're selling are planks, firewood, a little bit of berries, and some of the hides from the hunting camp. You can make a ton of money in the early game if you just export stuff that you have on hand. You can see right here all the stuff that we're exporting. So we're exporting planks, berries, hides, firewood, and meat. We have a ton of stuff for sale here. Now just imagine if we had 15 or 20 people, we could easily sell more than this. No problem at all. And then we would have money to come in here and open up an actual trading route. Let's say we wanted to turn that, instead of selling the hides, we'll turn it into leather and then shoes. It's only going to cost us 80, and then we're going to be making a ton more money. That'll be the next section though. Make sure in the early game, this is the best way to make money in the early game aside from taking out bandit camps. Just set up small exports for things that you have a little bit of oversupply of. I generally recommend doing hides. That's a really good one in the early game because they're worth 4 each, and you're always going to have it when you hunt. And then firewood always stacks up way more than you'll ever need. In this case, we have 70 months of firewood. We obviously don't need that much. So you could sell that. They're not worth much, but it does add up. And then whatever food supply you're getting, in our case, we had a lot of berries. It's really easy to make a lot of money with berries because I mentioned in the other section, these things sell for 3 each. So even if you're only selling 10 at a time, that's 30. You can easily plop down a chicken coop with that. You can get another goat shed. You could order another oxen and have halfway to the other one. This is the only way that you should be making money in the early game before you can afford trade routes. Now let's talk about the only way you're going to make long-term wealth, because obviously it's not sustainable to fight bandits the whole game. You're going to run out of territory for them to spawn on eventually. And then the trade routes making 400 a year is just not going to cut it. You're going to need to make thousands per year. And so you're eventually going to need to open up some of your own trade routes. So I have 2 towns where I'm trading heavily in. Now I also want to point out, this is done on the experimental patch. This is 0.7.960. It's a little bit different than if you're in the previous patch, which is 0.599 or something like that. So in the other patch, if you sell too many of one item in a short period of time, it'll create an oversupply, and then that item will not be worth anything. You won't even be able to sell it because the trader won't take it. In the current patch, the experimental patch, this is what it's going to be very soon. So I'm going to mostly cover this because it's a much more logical trade system than the other one. The other one was very temperamental and it's very finicky to work around it. You basically, if you still want to know how to do it, essentially what you need to do is create a big stockpile. So let's say, for example, if we're selling war bows, so we would have no trade on, we would save up 200 to 300 of an item, and then we would, at the beginning of the month, as soon as you hear the bell ring, you pause the game, flip this to export, and sell as many of these things as you can. And then when the bell rings for the next month, you want to turn it off of exports and then sell the other thing that you're planning on selling. So let's say in this case we had shoes. I usually have hundreds of shoes here, but I had sold off. But in this case, we want to turn trade off. We want to save up a bunch and then sell it. The price will eventually go back up after a couple months, and then you can do it again, but you have to toggle it. You basically have to babysit your trade routes. Again, in the new patch, you don't have to do that. The trade routes are a lot slower, so they don't come quite as often. And you can see here, I have quite a few trade routes set up on this one. War bows, small shields, and shoes. Even just those 3, after a few years, we're able to save up 32 grand, which is a pretty significant chunk of money. But essentially what you're going to want to do is start off with a single item that's worth a lot. Absolutely do not open trade routes for any of these low tier items unless you have a massive amount of them. I ended up opening some of these later, but not in the early game. I only did these in the late game, and I'll tell you why. If we go back here, if we want to open up another one of these trade routes, let's say we want to sell plate armor. It's going to cost 8,800 to do it. Let's say if we did not open these 2 food trade routes, this would probably be about a third of the cost. It'd probably be closer to like 4,000, 3,000 or 4,000. And so it'd be much cheaper to do it. So you always want to take your most expensive trade routes first, because it only gets more and more expensive based on the sell price of the item. So the sell price here is pretty high, right? Some of these that are worth 8 gold, you're gonna have to pay 2,600. But if we want to open a one that's only 1 gold, it's only gonna cost 370. But let's say if I did it in reverse. So this, for sure, we want to open up sidearms here, right? It's going to cost us 2644. But let's say I get impatient and I really want to sell my stone. So I'm going to open up the stone trade route. Now you can see it already went up a massive amount. So we're at 3,600. You do not want to open up any of these small rinky-dink trade routes. Do not do that. Save up your money. Open up the big trade routes first. So in this case, my order in this game was shoes first because this one was worth 8 each for the sale. So that means this was pretty expensive. And then I opened up some of these other ones next. I did war bows and small shields. And then once I knew this town couldn't fit anymore unless I expanded the population, which I didn't want to do. So I was capping this town's population there. I couldn't physically fit any more production out, and I needed to sell some of this food because I was basically having to toggle the production, and it's better to just sell it than having to toggle because number one, it's one less click I have to make each year, and we can make a little bit of money from it. So that's why I opened these trade routes. But you can see they're much cheaper right now. If I want to open a trade that's only 2 gold, it's only going to cost me 1,000. So I could do it. But if I do it in reverse and I open these food ones first, and then I want to open these ones, it is super expensive, and I do not recommend doing that. The other way you could cut down on these costs, and I talked about this in the optimization section, but you could take the trade logistics. Again, it's going to save us 50%. So you can see if we go to that trade route, we can open up another one for a little bit less now. It's only 1,800 for that sidearms, which is a lot more reasonable. But again, it's a one-time cost. And if we were to sell these for, I don't know, 3 months, 4 months, we'll make that cost up. And then we basically wasted a whole perk for what, 2 months of profit, 3 months of profit. To me, it's not worth it. So I would rather set it up right the first time. Open your trade routes for the expensive stuff, and then if you have any room left, do the cheaper ones later. Again, same thing over here. I had a lot more trade routes here, and you can see I even did the expensive one, the plate armor. I know this one usually costs like 7 or 8 grand if you don't get it early. So I tried to get plate armor as soon as I could. I believe I did tools first, and then I did helmets. And then I believe I did plate armor and mail at the same time, but I did plate armor first and then mail because you want to take the most expensive one first that you're looking to do. I still have some room. The only problem is I don't have any production of iron. The iron is all tapped out. This is about as much production as you can get. You can sell these 3 things plus tools, and that's all the iron mines will support. But you can see here, I didn't buy any of these small trade routes except for the berries, and I did this one last. This was the last one that I did, and for the same reason. I had too many berries. Rather than just stopping the berry production, it's better to just sell it off, and it saves me a click each year. But I didn't open any of these other trade routes because it just makes your cost jump up. Let's see how much it gets if we open these small. Yeah, if we open these small trade routes, now we're looking at 4,000 for each one. Let's see how expensive it goes up actually if we just open a bunch. So now we're looking at 8,000 just to buy polearms. We would have to sell 8,000 of these just to make that cost back, to make a profit. You can tell how much money you can make doing this. It is a massive amount of money. But I think what ends up happening is people get overwhelmed and they think, oh, I've got to sell 5 things. I have to set up 5 industries. Don't think that way. Do one at a time, get it dialed in, and then expand to something else after that. Have a plan for how you're going to do it when it comes to what perks you're going to take and maybe what location you're going to put stuff in. But when you focus on doing one trade at a time, and then once you have a lot of money coming in from that, then you expand to something else. It is much easier to manage your cash flow. It's much easier to manage your production cycles, and it's much easier to manage your trading post efficiency because sometimes this guy will get overwhelmed if you do too many things at once. If you do it slowly, then you kind of know what to expect. And if you see it going too slow, you can either add another person, you can add some more logistics to help him out. Like maybe you can add a granary or a storehouse nearby so you can get the goods faster. Focus on one item at a time. I did shoes here first, and then I slowly expanded the wood production later. And then after the wood was solid, then I added war bows, and then I bought the trade route. So one thing at a time, don't do too much at once. Another way you can make money is through your burgage plots. Now, this is generally not a good idea to solely rely on this for your money, but it does help a little bit. These tier 2 burgage plots will pay 1 gold per family. Tier 3 burgage plots pay 2 gold per family. So the easiest way to calculate how much money you're actually making from your town each month is to just look at this total population tab. We have 32 families at level 3. We can multiply that by 2. So we're making 64 gold per month. And then obviously the level 2, it only gives you 1 gold per month. So you just add that on. So 64 plus 8, we're making 72 gold every month without having to do a single thing. 72 isn't that much considering our trade is making us somewhere around, I think, 600 to 1,000 a month, depending on the cycle, where it is in the cycle. It is a very small amount of money compared to the trade. However, it does help a little bit. You can see with the annual royal tax, every family we're having to pay 5 gold every year for them. But obviously, if our families are generating a little bit of passive income every month, it does help pay for some of that at least. So don't ignore it. But also don't upgrade a bunch of families just to get it because you'll end up pushing your town level too high, and that actually increases your annual royal tax. So be careful with it. If you're going to go crazy with Burgage plot level 2. That will keep your town level from going too high. Because again, the annual royal tax is based on how many people you have multiplied by the level that you have your town at. And then the final thing we'll talk about is how to get your treasury up. You'll notice right here we have 31,000 in our regional wealth. This other town before we butchered it and bought a bunch of stuff had, I think, 28,000. And then our little farming stead has 6,600. It's still making decent money. But to be able to convert this over to our own personal money, we need to go to our manor house. And on the taxes tab, we need to set up a land tax. Now, I like to set very low amounts because I play on very hard difficulty, so you get a massive amount of approval loss when you do this. And you don't want to lose your whole town because you got greedy and taxed people too much. So generally, you're going to make a lot of money once you get your regional wealth up to a large number. You will make very little in the early game. So if you have 1,000 gold in regional wealth and you tax them 1%, you're making 10 gold per month. It's not a lot. However, you get that up to 10,000. Now you're making 100 a month. That's actually quite a lot of money. So you don't need a ton of regional wealth for this to really take off and make sense. But by doing this, it does two things. Number one, I already talked about the approval losses minimized. The other thing is it allows your regional wealth to expand to a certain point where they have a safety net. If you're making 200 gold off of somebody by taxing them 1% versus making 200 gold off of them by taxing 20%, you're going to basically suck all the regional wealth out and they're not going to have any left. So if you need to buy some extensions, if you need to pay for more animals, you're just not going to have any at all. So it's much safer to have a large regional wealth with a very small land tax. Now, granted, it takes time to get there and you may have to tax higher in the early game just to survive. But in general, you want to tax as little as possible until you get that regional wealth up, which again, if you're setting up a lot of trading post routes, you will very quickly get here in a couple years. No problem at all. I would say 5 years, you can easily have well above 10, 15,000 gold. And then keep in mind, I have a manor house in both of these areas, both set to a very low amount, only 1%. And again, this place had 28,000, that's 280 per month. This place has 31,000, that's 310 per month. We were making 500 gold per month off of a 1% tax. It's pretty incredible. And then if we ever have an emergency where we really need to do more, which obviously we don't with 50,000 in the bank, but if we ever needed to, we could do a big tax rate, just do like a 10% all at once. We'd get basically 3 grand all in a single month. And then we could start however many towns we need or hire mercenaries and whatnot. That's generally the two methods for managing your tax policy. I really don't like doing a high tax rate. I'd rather let the town thrive a little bit and then tax them. And a quick bonus tip, since we're already on this page. The tithe amount basically does the same thing for regional wealth, but it does it for influence and your food. So whatever number you put in here, it's going to take a certain amount of this food and convert it into influence. So we have 1% tithe. It's going to convert 1% of our food. It's 1,800. That should be 18 food, and it'll give us 18 influence every month. That's not a whole lot. I usually set this a little bit higher. This is also a great way to limit your food in the late game, because late game food can actually be a real problem. You'll notice our meat is getting out of control. We actually have a trade route for meat. You can see right here, we're trying to sell all the way down to a 300 limit. It's not able to keep up with how much our production is. And so even though we're not selling it, the other way we can get rid of this meat without having to turn off our hunting camps is to just tithe all that food away. We can turn the tithe up. It'll eat more of the meat than it eats anything else because it's percentage based. Because the problem is if we turn off our hunting camps, that's the only way we're making our leather, and that the leather makes shoes, and shoes is a massive part of our economy. So if we get too much meat, it's going to fill up our granary. We're going to have several granaries, and eventually we're just going to have, 10 granaries full of meat and absolutely nothing to do with it. It is a real problem, believe it or not. So tithe can help you manage your late game inventory if you have too much food and you have nowhere to get rid of it. Now, I know I touched on this in another section, but I want to reiterate a few things here. So let's talk about planning your region specialization. This was my starting region. We have wild animals and stone deposit, and I know I've said this many times, but this is basically the absolute worst start that you can have. But even with a bad start, you can come out with a pretty nice looking town if you stick to a plan. My plan here was to not go very big because there's not enough infrastructure here to support a big population. Not only can I not produce enough weapons because there's no iron here, the soil's not good, and there's no other industry that I can make other than wood, which you can do anywhere, and then obviously hides, leather, and shoes, which again, you can do anywhere because you can just build goat sheds. So this was pretty much a worst case scenario, but again, I had a game plan. My plan was to establish a town, make a base of operations where I had a little bit of wealth coming out. I could make enough money and expand quickly. And so I went next door here first. And this was where I had a rich iron deposit. So this was allowing me to produce a ton of armor. I could easily transition that into weapons if I needed to pump it into military. But again, this is also a very wealthy region where I was making quite a bit of money every month. This region actually made more money than the original region, even though it was built 5 years later. And then the plan after that was to expand to a region that had good soil because I wanted to have a big town and I needed to produce a lot of barley to be able to supply them with that. And again, this town was making over 1,000 barley per year. I think it was closer to 1,500 actually per harvest. And this was getting shipped back to the other two big towns. And that was my original game plan. Again, I came in here, I knew I wasn't going to need too many perks. I focused primarily on what I had available, which was the meat. I didn't even spend the other 3 production points because I very quickly moved to this region as fast as I could. And then I focused pretty heavily on deep mining and then producing armor, which was basically able to fund the economy, and then it spurred us forward into here. And now if I really wanted to, I could funnel over 1,000 ale per year into this region, which would very easily support this population. So if I wanted to, I could take this population probably up to 1,000 or more. Not really the ideal location. My ultimate game plan was to come up here to Nuslocha or Imenruth. Imenruth would probably be better because it is a decent sized land. It also has good soil. So if I needed to produce food in-house, I wouldn't have to transport it anywhere. I could just make a ton of bread here. So that's kind of how I specialized my region. This was just the starter region and I did everything I could to get an economy up. This one was to really get the economy ramped up because it had iron deposits. And it also secured the military. Then I moved into an area that would help me expand my population's needs, which is primarily ale. And then the final goal is to get up here to Imenruth, which we could have done a very long time ago. We have 44,000 gold. We could have easily done it. But I got lazy and decided to make this video instead. So again, when you first start off, make sure you kind of think about your game plan. How do you want to approach it? Do you want to stick to one area? If you're only going to do one area, you have to figure out a way to overcome the shortcomings, what you're working with. You can see right here, I started to do that a little bit. I have some barley. This produces just about enough to supply this small town of 131 people. It's not quite enough, and I do ship a few from this middle town over here. But if I wanted to grow much bigger, I would have to make even more farms. A little more barley up here that helps. But again, this region has very poor soil. And so the game plan was not to make a big town here, or at least not in the immediate future. The goal was to expand elsewhere, and I put a game plan together to do just that. And same thing here, this was not supposed to be a big town. We kept it to 161, which is just enough to run all the industry and the trade and keep the approval up above 70. And then this one, 114 population, everybody's pretty much low tier because I don't want to pay a high tax. And again, this was all deliberate because the whole point of this town is to funnel resources back to the main towns, the ones that are actually making good money. And now we can do whatever we want with all these other regions. Since we conquered everything, this is all ours. Now let's talk about farming, and I know I covered this in a guide pretty extensively, but I have learned a few things since then, and I also feel like I can cover it a little bit more thoroughly here. So there's 2 farming types. There's automated farming, which you can see down here. I do have an automated farming setup, and you could usually tell because it's set up in pairs of 2s or 3s. Usually 3s. And then over here, this is manual farming. It's just all over the place. Whatever's available is what's going right at the moment. So the reason it's different when you automate your farms, let's take a look at this one in particular. So this farmhouse is handling this farm. This farmhouse is handling this farm. So I have 1 person for 3 fields, 2 are fallow, 1 is being worked. Same thing here, 2 fallow, 1 being worked. And let's open up these fields to see what is going on underneath the hood. So we can see a rotation of every 3 years, it repeats. So we had barley in the top, barley in the middle, and then barley in the bottom for the other field. So it's 2 years of fallow, 1 year of barley. It's a bit inefficient, unfortunately, because when you automate it, you can only do in groups of 3. Like if we were to do barley, barley, fallow, the second year would basically be 0. You would not get a crop yield and you'd just be wasting your time. So it's better to leave it on fallow and just add more fields so that we guarantee ourselves at least 1 good barley yield per year. And I set these up in very specific sizes. You can see right here, this is about the same size. This is a 0.6 Morgan field, and that size field is good enough for 1 family without an ox to harvest it. As long as I have 1 farm field with 1 person working it, I can harvest everything in here without any fail every single year. Now, one thing that if you're going to do this method, this is very important. They did fix it. This is on the experimental patch. It works much better than the other patch, but under the advanced tab, you have a limited work area. So you set it, don't go too big because then they'll expand into other ones. You just want you to circle the touch every field that you want them to work. So if we touch these 3, they will only touch these 3 fields. That means when they first start, they come over here, they do their job, they go back home. If any other field needs help, too bad, it's not in their field. And like I said, if you're setting these up at the optimal size, they will harvest this and just barely have time to take them back. And then the next month starts, they're just going to barely have enough time to plow and seed it before winter sets on. So let's say if I had 20 farmers, I could set up 20 of these 3 sets of fields all over the place. And you would automate it. I haven't touched this town. Let's see, what year are we in? Year 20. I have not touched this town in at least, I want to say 12 years, because I've been working on this town and then I worked on this town. I have not adjusted this at all. This is working like clockwork. They get a certain amount of barley every year. It gets taken in to the malt house and then to the brewer and then to the tavern. And you can see right here, again, I haven't really touched it. We have plenty of ale in the tavern. It's all completely automated. This is automated farming using crop rotation. It's set it and forget it. However, you could see it leaves a lot of inefficiency because there's a lot of fields not being worked. Let's talk about manual farming, which is generally how I recommend doing it in the town that I'm currently focused on. And then when I'm done focusing on that town, I switch it over to automated first. So I generally start manual and then I move into automated, just because you're going to get a much better yield by doing it manually. So by manual, essentially all I'm doing is I'm making as many fields as I can. You can see how many fields, we have a massive amount of fields. It stretches the whole region basically. And there's even more that I can do down here. However, these fields are generating about 1,500 barley per year, which is more than I need. So it doesn't really make sense to give myself more work. But essentially what you're doing is every time you see a field that has a percentage that you're happy with, and for me, I'm happy in this area since this is rich soil, I like to keep it at about 35 to 40%. If I see a 35 to 40%, I'm going to pick it on barley. I'm only caring about barley here because that's what I'm trying to go for. So you can see right here, this field, we do the drop down 38%. That's fine. We can turn it on and we just let it do its thing. This one, 39%, we'll let it do its thing. And you can see a lot of these are actually in good shape because they were in fallow over the winter and they've regained most of their fertility. Now all we need to do is make sure that we have plenty of workers in the farmhouses. In this case, I have 2 farmhouses full of workers. We're short 1, but we can pick that up if we just take somebody off. There we go. 2 full workers. We've got 2 oxen in each one. And again, depending on what patch you're on, if you're on the previous patch, it's only going to let you do 1 per farmhouse. The experimental patch, 0.7.960, allows you to do 2 per. Doesn't really matter. Just if you want more oxen, just build an extra farmhouse and throw an ox on there. It's really not a big difference. But we assign them and we let them go to work. So you're going to see the oxen are going to go deal with some of the farm fields. The farm fields that are not being handled by the oxen are going to be plowed by hand by the farmers. So if an oxen is working a field, they kick everybody off the field. There's no farmers on the field, so they all have to work separately. People that do it by hand are on one, and the oxen are doing their own thing. In general, if you have more fields to plow than you have people to do it and oxen to do it, just let everybody on there. If you get down to the point where you have maybe 2 fields left and you have 4 oxen working, but you still have 16 people ready to do it, you will actually plow the field faster with 16 people doing it by hand rather than a single oxen doing it one by one. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to micromanage the oxen by going to advanced and taking them off. Take them off, send them home, don't let them touch the field. So then you'll see what happens is they leave the field and then all the people will come here, swarm and do it. Now obviously we have more fields than we have oxen to plow. So that means people are able to get in there and do it by hand. And it's way more efficient to have oxen doing it alongside people doing it by hand. So leave that on. But again, if you see the oxen starting to hog the field and your other farmers are just idle, doing whatever, waiting around, you want to micromanage the oxen, pull it off. So they're just going to go through and handle all these fields. I'm going to skip forward a little bit until we get to the point when it's time to start force harvesting. Now, typically you would harvest in September because that's when the game wants you to do it. However, when you're manually farming, September is usually not a good month to harvest because in September, every single field gets harvested no matter what, even if you don't want it to be harvested. So if we hold tab, we can see most of these are ready for harvest, but you can see some down here, they are not quite yet ready for harvest. So the AI will actually come in here and pull these fields. Even though they are 0 yield, they will ruin all of this hard work. So I do not recommend harvesting in September if you can help it. You generally want to harvest anytime from March all the way up to August, pull everybody off, and then start going again October and November. You can basically harvest year round except for the winter time. So December through February, you cannot harvest. Let's just say right now we have our workers ready to go. We want to harvest some of these. We don't want to wait for September. We want to do it right now. So go 1 field at a time. Now, how do you know if something's ready to harvest, right? If I hold tab, you can see this one is 53 out of 53, and this one is 104 out of 104. They look like they're about the same field size, and they actually are. I did everything here between 1.1 Morgan and 1.2 Morgan roughly, but let's see why this one has a much lower yield. If we see here, this one is only grown 35%, whereas this one has grown 99%. So obviously something that grows all the way is going to have a higher yield, although this one says that it's not going to grow anymore. Why is that? If you look down here, we're in August. Next month is September, which is the harvest season. This estimate is telling you what is the yield if you harvest in the harvest season that the AI wants you to do it in, which is September. Again, being humans, we don't want to follow the AI because a lot of times they make stupid decisions. You would never want to harvest your field at 35%. It's a really bad idea. So generally, if you see a low yield or if you see that your growth percentage is low, do not touch this. Let it go. It needs more time to grow. So we're not going to touch this. Any of these low ones, this 54, the 47, they've been planted later in the year, which is why they have a low percentage. This one's probably a little bit better. Yeah, this one's 100% at 73. That's not too bad. So we can harvest some of these. But what you do not want to do is just go around and force harvest everything all at once. Generally, you want to do it in a somewhat logical fashion because it's easier to track everything. So this one is 100%. This one's 100%. And this one's 100%. Let's harvest all of these. What we're going to do is we're going to click forced harvest, and then we'll let the game run and see what they do. So they're going to rush out here, do it all by hand. And again, if we have too many fields selected, they're going to be all over the place. They actually split up evenly based on how many fields that you have. So you generally want to throw as many people at one field at a time if you can. 2 or 3 is fine if you have a lot of people going. And then what they're going to do is they're going to quickly collect all the crops and throw it in the closest farmhouse to them, which happens to be this one. So you can see they just make a mad beeline right for this. They're going to throw all the supplies in there. They're going to get this one next, and then they have to harvest this one. Now, as soon as this one's done, you'll notice when you hold tab, you see 0 to 0. We want to click this open. These are both done. We don't want to harvest again because that was only 23% and this one's only 20%. That would give us a very bad yield. So we're going to turn forced harvest off. We're going to turn this back to fallow and leave this alone for half a year, and it should be in good shape. Now, this one obviously is still being harvested. It's got 14 crops on it still. We can't do anything. We don't want to click off force harvest because that'll stop what they're doing. So let's let them finish. And it's 0. We'll turn off force harvest. And after a few seconds, this will allow us to change it back and we can go back to fallow. We could force harvest another path if we want, or we could let them collect the barley that's on the field. It is raining, so we want to get that stuff off of the fields. Otherwise, it's going to get damaged. And you can see right here, it got damaged, unfortunately. So we want to get that off as soon as we can. And it is September, so at this point, this is very important. We have fields on here that we do not want to harvest. These are not done yet. It's only 41%. We need to pause everything. Even if you force harvest some of these ones that you do want, they will ignore it and they will just go for the closest one. So do not harvest during September unless everything you have is ready to harvest. So just pause it. We'll wait for September to go by, and then we can get back to work. It is October. September's passed. We can control what is being harvested now. Kind of a shame that you have to do that. You have to not harvest during the harvest season because the AI just takes over, but that's just how the game is right now. So again, we're going to go back to it. We want to find all the fields that are ready to harvest. Some of these are not quite yet ready, but we can see some up here. This is 100%, so we'll force to early harvest that. We also need to get crops off of this field. And then what you're going to end up doing is essentially once these are all done and harvested, you're going to take a look at your fallow fields every once in a while, maybe every 3 months or 6 months, and just see if the percentage is good enough. You can see most of these are not. 27%, again, it's not quite there yet, but it's not terrible. This one, 21%, again, we want to switch that off because we do not want to harvest that one again, or we don't want to plant on it again. 86, this is a forced early harvest. That one's ready to go, and we just go down the line. Yeah, it looks like most of these are not quite yet ready. They'll probably be ready right before winter, which means we may not get to it until March, unfortunately. But that's fine. We'll have a really big harvest early next year. And we have a few hundred to work on. We've got 581 barley just from these few fields. And we still have a massive, 1,500 actually may not be enough. This might be more than that. This is probably closer to 2,000. This is a huge, huge harvest. And we only have 16 people working the farms. That is the power of manual farming. It is absolutely insane how much farming you can do if you do it manually. So again, let's just say these were a good amount of fertility. We would just flip it to barley, and then you'll see all the oxen are going to come out and start working the fields. So the only time you have to worry about is winter time. You can't do anything during winter, so you pause it. You go do other things. You have 3 months to do all the other stuff you need to do. In this case, probably working on infrastructure, either building out more houses or converting more wood so that you can get ready to build more houses. We could work on other industries. Usually what I like to do is suck all the resources out. So in this case, I got all the iron and all the clay. I did not yet get all the stone deposits. So that'll probably be the next task. And then I'll probably end up, in this case, I'll probably put down some forester huts so I can repopulate the trees in this area and make sure that our woodcutters are being efficient. Again, manual farming, you're not letting these people sit. Like when we did automated farming, these people literally have 3 months out of the year to do stuff. These people working in the farms. The other 9 months, they do absolutely nothing, completely wasting their time twiddling their thumbs. Automated farming, it's nice because you don't have to touch it, but when you do your manual farming, you're watching every little detail, but you're also getting a massive, massive boost to productivity. Now let's talk about some late game issues. If you're looking to expand into owning and managing multiple towns, there's a few things that you're probably going to want to do and a few things you're definitely going to want to avoid. So this was my first town, and I mostly got it stabilized by doing a lot of manual work. But eventually, once I was ready to expand to the next town next door, I started converting all these farms that I was doing manually into automated farming. So again, I split, and I know I covered this in the farming section, but I split every field up into 3 sections, 0.6 Morgan each, one person working it because I did not have the plowing station. So this is as much as one person can handle. I spread these fields out as far as I could. I put as many farmhouses with workers in them as I needed. And I calculated this to be roughly what it needs to be to get the ale for this town. It was actually short. My calculation was off, so I don't even want to go over that. But you can kind of test it out before you do it, and then just check and see every year how your levels are doing, your inventory levels. Generally, 0.6 will get you about 40 per plot. It's not quite that, unfortunately, because the soil is really bad here, and so sometimes it doesn't even get to the full harvest. You can see some of these are starting out in the mid 20s, which is not good. If you're doing manual farming, you can definitely get that because you harvest it early. But when you do automated farming like this, you have to have like 30, somewhere in the 30% range if you want to get a full harvest. Otherwise, it's going to cut off early and you're not going to get that much actually. But with that said, I still wanted to have some kind of trickle because then I wouldn't have the negative approval loss the entire year. It would just be for a couple months, and then the supply would catch up again the following year. So that was automated. I also made sure I automated all of my food production. So I permanently had people on the hunting camps, even though they are hunting it down to the limit and they're going to be doing a lot of sitting around. But you know what? You can't micromanage if you're going to set everything on automated, because you're going to need to spend all of your focus on the new town and very little time is going to be spent here. If you're having to juggle 2 or 3 towns at once, not only are you going to miss things, but it's just not fun. In my opinion, it's not fun. I also set up my logging camp. I set up the forester hut. And right now I've fiddled with these. I had people working here, and that's why you see all the trees. But yeah, I had a logging camp ready. I had a forester hut in 3 different locations. So I had plenty of trees to go around. And that was feeding the saw pit, which I had a reserve really high up. But unfortunately, when you save and reload, the reserve goes away. You have to reset this every time. But anyways, you can see right here, the reserve didn't really help because it's still making 1,100 planks, which we will never use. Which leads me to my next point. After you get all this stuff automated and you move on to the next town, you're going to want to pick a point in the year, usually a slow time, like maybe winter time is usually a little bit slower where you can't really micromanage too much because things aren't growing. So maybe around December, January, you want to pause the game and just go around to your settlements and just keep tabs and see how things are going. Keep an eye on the stocks. You can see right here, our planks are getting out of hand. 1,100 is too much. I ended up having to build a second storehouse here just to help oversupply. You know, anything that's overage will end up in this emptier one. But you want to avoid this in the first place. Like, we wouldn't have this problem if we didn't have so many planks. So what we'll probably end up doing here is I would cycle this off, just turn it off, take the person out of it. You can put them somewhere else or just leave them idle. It doesn't really matter because everything else should be automated. So you should not need this extra worker because everything is taken care of if you set up your automation properly. So just leave them so you don't, the problem is if you, let's say we want to be perfectly efficient and let's say we put them in the tannery so we can get more leather out more efficiently. Then maybe next year you don't remember where you put this guy. So now you're looking through all of your things. Okay, where did I put him? Not the farmhouse. You know, not did I put him in the forester hut? Maybe you don't remember, maybe you do. If you leave him idle, you know exactly where this person goes, right? You know for sure the saw pit because you're going to see your plank number is going to go down. Maybe in 2 years, it's going to be down to 300, and that's kind of an emergency. You got to turn that thing back on so you don't stall out your economy. Because we're using planks here to make bows and shields, and then we're selling those on the market. So that's one thing to keep an eye out for. Anything that's producing a lot of. Same thing with firewood. It's the same thing as planks. You're going to have to cycle these guys off and on sometimes. Unfortunately, there's no limiter on here. Like I can't say stop when you have 600. If they added that to the game, that would be a really nice touch, especially when you're trying to automate. The other thing that can get out of hand is your food. And I know I touched on this in the other section, but there's a few ways that you can get rid of food if you're producing too much of it. Because again, when you're automating, it's way better to have too much food than not to have enough. However, having too much food at a very high rate is a bad thing because you can easily clog up your granary, which means there's no room for the other foods to come in, and you'll end up with just that one food, and then everybody's going to get pissed off because they want 4 foods, but you only have 1 because you have no space. A couple things you can do is you can, if you have a very small trickle, a little bit of excess, you can go to your trade tab, and that's exactly what I did here is I opened up 2 trade routes, one for meat because I had way too much, and then for berries as well. And you can see I'm selling berries at several locations. It is oversupplied, but the export price is still the same. This is on the experimental patch 0.7.960. So they haven't quite tweaked this just yet, but if you sell too much, you're not going to get a good price. However, in this case, I really don't care what they sell the price for. I could sell it for free and I would be just as happy with it. My main concern is not having too much of it, right? I don't want this much meat. The vegetables were actually out of control earlier. I think I had 1,200 vegetables here, and then I've done a really good job getting it down by selling it. And also, and I'm going to talk about this in just a second, but I also sent them with a pack station to another town that doesn't have vegetable gardens. So you can regulate your food several different ways. And then the final way that I like to do it is if all else fails, turn on your tithe, and that'll take food as a percentage from every single spot. So you'll lose 2% of your meat, 2% of your veggies, 2% of your berries, etc. Now, obviously you have more meat than anything else. If that's the thing that needs to go away, the percentage is going to take more of that than it is the other ones. So it does help even everything out because it's percentage based. But if you do that, if you sell your excess, if you send it off to another town through a pack station, you limit it with your tithe, and you toggle on and off certain sources, that can help. There is one other method that I did not use in this case, but I'm going to talk about it because it is pretty helpful. The other thing you can do, let's say, for example, when I had that veggie problem, I was about 11 or 1,200 vegetables, and you could see there's only 2,500 storage space. I have 5 foods, and more than 50% of it was one food type. That's a problem. So if you can't sell these off fast enough and you don't want to do tithing and all that other stuff, all you need to do is come into your large granary, go to the advanced tab, and turn off veggies. And what'll end up happening is they will still pick the veggies, they will put it in their pantry, and eventually the pantry will get full and they will just leave it out of the street. The rain will come and wipe it out, and then you basically just erase the veggies. It's kind of a waste, but again, you don't have to do any micromanaging here other than when your veggies stock and get back under control, you can come back in here and turn it back on. So that's many different ways that you can manage all of your supply. And again, this is very important when you're doing automated because you're not seeing the day-to-day here. You're going to check on this once a year at most. So if you have, let's say you're producing an extra 200 meat per year and you don't look at this town for 5 years, that's 1,000 meat sitting in your storage. You're going to for sure have issues with oversupply and overstock. Make sure once a year, come in here, check and see. You'll kind of get to know what the problem childs are. So for this specific town, the problem child mostly is meat and veggies here, planks here, and then on this tab, leather's not so much. Usually it's the shoes. I have to toggle the cobbler on and off because you can see right now, actually on this save file, he was already disabled. I think at one point I had 700 shoes and you're only selling 50 every month or every other month. So it takes a really long time to get that stock down. And again, that is just sitting in your supply at your storehouses. So if you have 1,000 shoes, that means you don't have room for anything else. So you have 2 or 3 items that you have 1,000 of, you literally have no space. And then you have no room for your firewood. You're going to run out. People will freeze it in winter. It just becomes a big problem. So make sure you keep an eye on whatever is going to be a problem child for you. Now, this other town is actually pretty well balanced, although it does have a problem with berries and veggies. Again, with the berries, all the things that I talked about before are valid, or you can just toggle these people off for another year or 2. That's probably the easiest way to do it. I also have the market up here that's selling berries to make sure that stock stays low, and then I also have my tithe on. So again, you can see I use multiple methods because you don't really want to rely on just one method. You probably want to layer them because each one method is only going to get you so far. But if you take all of them as one, then it's going to make a much bigger difference together. So here, another big issue is firewood and charcoal. So typically what happens is the firewood would stack up to a high amount. Then I would turn on the charcoal. Everybody goes to charcoal and I turn off all of my wood cutters. Then it slowly converts firewood to charcoal, and now I have another problem because I have too much charcoal and no firewood. No firewood's not a problem if I have a lot of charcoal, but then again, your charcoal is going to be filling up your inventory. So this is kind of a pain in the butt, and this is one of the reasons why I will generally try and limit my charcoal amount and my woodcutters amount to be as close to even break even as possible, because having to micromanage this every single year is kind of a pain, and there's not really a lot of benefit. Like, you're selling a little bit of this every month, but compared to all the other stuff you're selling and the other things you could be selling if you didn't have to do that because you could be setting up a new town, it's just not worth it. So try and get as many of these as close to break even as possible. So probably one woodcutter and one charcoal kiln. That'll probably suffice for this entire town for breaking even, basically. Now you can see these two towns are already automated, so I shouldn't have to touch much of this here other than just checking on it. Usually I do my check in December. Right around December, I'll pause the game and I'll come in here and I'll just keep an eye and make sure that everything's getting taken care of. You can see the hides here are actually starting to pile up, so those can be sold, or what I usually ended up doing, since I'm already making shoes in this one, I would send it here through a pack station. Although you can see this place already has a problem getting rid of the shoes, so it's probably better just to sell these things, or just stop farming altogether. Now that leads me to the final point, and that is that you should always have at least one town that you're manually controlling everything, and right now that is this farming village. This village was built to send all the ale that these two towns need, and also the new town that I plan on making up here in Imirruth. We'll do that right now. So we'll set up a nice new town here, and we have plenty of supplies that we can ship to them if we can get a packing station set up and a little bit of cash in this town. We can help them along. But again, as I start to work on this town, now I need to convert this manual farm all over to automated farm. So that means I need to split up a lot of these fields. I need to make probably a few more farmhouses and get them stuck to maybe 1 or 2 fields at a time so they don't go all over the map. So it'll take a bit of time to demolish these, make smaller plots, and then come over here, set up your crop rotation so that everything rotates evenly. So we want to have barley, so barley in the top, barley in the middle, barley in the bottom. And again, make sure you set up your workers, and then you're also going to need to set up the people that are going to take care of the stuff afterwards. You would normally do this all at once, so you'd have all the fields plowed and sowed. Then you would transition all those workers to handle the malt house, and then you would have everything sent to the storehouse, and then to the brewer, and then to the tavern. Now, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to shift labor around when you're automating, so you do lose a massive amount of efficiency. So like I said, probably want to at least have one town under manual control because you're going to have a lot more efficient time with it. But when it's time to move on, then you got to split it up and do what you got to do. And then when we're up here, again, we're just going to have to pause every December. Whenever you choose to pause, just make sure you make it consistent so that you know what your stock levels should be every year, and just try and take a mental note of everything. So let's say here it's December. We're going to pause, come down here, and then again, check all the stuff that we're looking at, check all the stuff we're looking at this town. And then this one is a new one converted. So this one we would have to pay a little bit more close attention to because I don't know what the normal stocks are supposed to be based on the automated farming that we set up. Now, obviously, berries are too much here, so we would probably want to either put less people on the forager huts just to let that draw down naturally, or we could start selling it or do whatever else we need to do. And then that'll free up our time so we can pay 100% attention to this for 11 months out of the year, and then that 1 month we'll focus on the others. And that brings us to the final point here. Let's talk about how to use the packing station. Now, this is a very misunderstood building, both myself included in that. I did not know how this worked because I was using it wrong. So let's come up here and show you how it works. So when you first build the building, there's a couple things you need to pay attention to. You do have 2 stable space here, and that's because you can order a mule, and the mule will help you carry more items per trip. When you put a family on it, you got 3 people, and they all carry everything by hand, which in this case, normally it's only 1 item, but for the packing station, they actually are allowed to carry 5 items. So it's 15 items per family, and they have to walk it by hand all the way to the other town and then bring the other items back. So essentially, we're sending to Hofstetten, we're sending ale, and we're expected to receive vegetables back. Now, in the current patch that I'm on, this is the 0.7.960. It doesn't quite work that way. Also, the previous patch, the 0.7.955, I believe it was, it doesn't work. I don't think they really changed this actually, so it should be the same in that patch too. When you set this up, they will take whatever you're trying to send. So in this case, we have 3 people carrying 5 each. They don't have a mule. They would carry 15 ale. They would go to Hofstetten, which is down here. And at Hofstetten, they would go to the trading post and they would drop off the ale. And you can see here, there's a ton of ale sitting here because we've been doing this trade for a while. They will then continue down to the warehouse down here and they will grab vegetables and then they will come back and bring that back. Unfortunately, what ends up happening, these guys are supposed to bring the ale by itself and then take the vegetables by itself. What ends up happening is they sell the ale here at the trading post. So the town that is having the goods sent to has to have money to buy it. Otherwise, you're going to get bugged. Those villagers will basically be glitched out at the trading post and they'll just be gyrating back and forth forever. You can't get them back. So make sure the place that you are sending it to has enough money to buy it as if it was an export. So there's no markup on it. It's just whatever the price is. So in this case, ale sells for 8 each. So as long as this place has money to buy it, they'll be fine. Then what they're supposed to do is they're supposed to go grab an equal amount of vegetables based on the price. So if ale sells for 8 and vegetables sell for 2, you're going to take 4 times as many vegetables as you're taking ale. Unfortunately, this doesn't work. They grab a single vegetable and they run back and drop it off. But when it is actually functioning properly, they will end up taking whatever the vegetable amount is, cut it in a fourth, and they'll take that amount of ale and then take the correct amount of vegetables back. The other thing you can do to upgrade this to go a little bit faster, or not faster, but you can carry more items per, is you can order mules. You can see here we have 2 mules. They're both assigned. And that means you're going to have 2 people escorting a mule, and you'll have 1 person doing it by hand. The mules carry 20 each, so you basically get 40 plus the 5 is 45 per trip. They will do the same thing. They'll take it down here to the trade post. Here, let's actually watch them do it this time. So you can see this one's going into the brewery to grab it. And if we pause it, they could see she is bartering for ale. She's on her way to Hofstetten, and she's going to get veggies on the way back. Now, the other people are going to go grab the mules. You can see this guy did grab the mule. Now, it's a little bugged. He's got some wheels like a cyborg or something. But he's going to go up here, and he's going to start loading up the mule with a bunch of ale. There you go. And the same thing, if we zoom in, we can see he is going to Hofstetten, ale for vegetables. So we'll keep an eye on, watch this trip. So you can see our first lady that's carrying it by hand. She's about to make her way there. We'll keep an eye on the beer or the ale and see what she did. And it's also, you'll see the money pop up. So we go from 297 to 302. So she was carrying 5 and it didn't pop up with the money, but you'll notice if you keep track of the regional wealth, I've tracked it several times. It does actually take the money out. So 8 times 5. So Hofstetten had to pay 40 gold for that ale. And then he's going to go down and steal 1 veggie for free, basically. And again, we'll see the mules come in. They're bringing another 40 in. So 20 on this one, 20 on that one. Here it goes. We'll see the ale go up by 20. There you go. 322 and 342. Never mind. This guy went by hand. They're supposed to take 2 mules. I think one of them's bugged. Yeah, sometimes when you import the mules from a livestock trader, the animal will get attached to somebody and they will actually not be able to be used. You can sell them off to get rid of them, but you can't actually assign them to a building. It happens a lot with sheep. You'll notice people have a sheep following them around. That's how that happens. So this lady went in and picked up a single vegetable. She's going to go carry it back. Same thing with everybody here. And then once they get back here, they just repeat the process over and over. So if you're curious how many supplies are being shipped, it really depends on how long it takes them to make this full cycle. So what you might want to do if you're trying to calculate something that's a little bit more precise, like let's say you need 100 ale per month, then you need to know how many packing stations can do that run in a single month. Maybe it takes them 2 months to do it. So let's say, for example, if we can carry, let's just, I know it's 45, but let's just reuse round numbers for example. If it's 50 per trip and it takes them 2 months to do it and you need 100 ale, that means you need 200 ale in 2 months to even out to 100 a month. So that means you'd have to have 4 packing stations running full time with the mules. So again, it's very important to keep an eye and see how long it takes them to go here, drop it off, and come back and start the process again. The only thing you could do to optimize is you could build the packing station at the edge of the map, and you could also build whatever warehouse you're trying to transport the good from. In this case, we have a large granary right here that's got 270 ale. We could easily rebuild this granary somewhere down here at the edge of the map, and then we could put the packing station here, and that would save them the trip from having to go all the way up here. And then same thing at Hofstetten, we could build some stuff. This one's pretty optimized. The trading post is up here, but we could move it a little closer, and that would basically just cut the trip to just this little link right here. However, if you're all over the map, there's not really a whole lot you can do. Like if we're going from Immenruth all the way down to Hofstetten, it's just going to be a long trip and you got to kind of calculate it and see if it's worth it or not. I'm curious to hear what part of Manor Lords you struggled with the most and if this video actually helped with that or not. Let me know in the comments if I missed anything, and I can make a follow-up video on that topic. A huge thanks goes out to the Patreon supporters and YouTube channel members for helping support this channel. Long videos like this generally don't make enough money to justify the amount of work that goes into making them, so your financial contributions go a long way in that regard. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.